Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. But would it really be so bad? My mother asked me, as we mulled over the movie we'd been enjoying that evening. We loved discussing what we watched together. We would often watch movies on the settee, accompanied by a delicious large bowl of buttered honey and cinnamon-flavoured popcorn, along with large iced glasses of fizzy Mountain Dew, so that you could be forgiven into believing that we were actually at a movie theatre, when in fact we were at home all along in our living room, enjoying the benefits of a massive flat-screen television. At the time my father was playing bridge with an old friend who lived on the upper side of Manhattan, bounded by 96th Street to the north, which was only a street away from where we lived, in our New York neo-Italian Renaissance-styled apartment building. "Are you kidding me, Mum? Imagine discovering your biological father was not really your father at all. It's got to be pretty devastating." I said this, popping the popcorn into my mouth with gusto. "Let's not kid. I can't imagine how I would react in the circumstances if it were to happen to me." "But," repeated my mother, her hands clasping the coffee mug so tightly that I could see her white knuckles were beginning to show, "by all accounts the young man had a very, very good life. I mean, what more could he have asked for? The father absolutely adored him. They loved each other to pieces. Isn't that all that matters in the end? It's not all about biological bloodlines, surely." "Yes, but it was all a lie, Mum. Did the father not deserve to know that his son was not his own? Did he not at least have that intrinsic right? What about the real father? Wasn't he entitled to know that he had fathered a child of his own? And as for the poor son, he was a victim in all of this because of his mother's adulterous affair. It was grossly unfair for him to have been left in the dark. Doesn't he have the right to know about his family roots and bloodlines?" "I think it happens more than you know," said my mother. "Fathers, I mean, who falsely believe that they are the genuine father when they're clearly not. I mean, look at you. Do you look like your father at all? No, you don't, but you're still your father's son." She said this, raising a quizzical, questioning brow. "What are you saying, Mum?" I asked, my hands dropping the popcorn on the floor, which was intended for my mouth, my blood running cold. "What the heck are you trying to say? Don't talk in riddles, Mother." My mother looked awkward, like a round peg in a square hole that would rather be anywhere else than in this living room right now. I didn't like the way this conversation was heading, not at all. Like an anomalous hiking trail in the woods that seemed way off centre. I sensed something didn't feel right, while the hairs on the back of my neck were now standing on edge, like the prickles on a hedgehog's back. "Well, you know the therapist I've been visiting for my anxiety disorder that I've been suffering from for so many years after that dreadful car accident I had in Harlem?" I nodded. "What has that got to do with anything, Mother?" "A whole lot, as it happens. You see, Dr. Huxley believes I need to be up front, open about everything that I've bottled up all my life. He believes all the secrecy hanging around me is robbing me of inner peace, causing me undue distress. He says I need to clear the air with you."
"You need to clear the air with me? Ma'am, what the heck are you talking about? You're scaring the hell out of me."
"Well, I chose the movie tonight on purpose to gauge your reaction, son. But I can see that I'm going to have to say it as it is. You are right. The boy in that story did have a right to know who his father was. Just like you deserve to know the truth about yours, who he really is." I stared at my mother dumbfounded, my eyes wide like saucers, my mouth hanging open, my heart pounding violently in my chest.
"Are you saying that Dad isn't my real father?"
I watched the tears building up in my mother's eyelashes until the floodgates of her tear ducts burst open. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was not comfortable seeing my mother cry like this, but I was confounded by what she appeared to be trying to say. I couldn't make sense of any of it. "Look at yourself in the mirror, sweetheart. Isn't it apparent you're not your father's son? You're tall, dark, handsome. You have a very distinctive olive skin and hazel eyes. Your dad has the typical Scandinavian blonde hair, blue eyes, and is so much more willowy than you are. I was certain you would figure it out one day. It was staring you blindly in the face like a dazzling light. But maybe when you don't want to see something, it's easier to pretend that it's not really there." I could feel the anger rising up in my belly.
"You thought I'd figure it out one day, Mother? That's rich even coming from you. I'm very sorry to assume that I was my father's son. After all, you never told me any different. What was I supposed to think? Does Dad even know about this?"
My mother shook her head of brown curls vigorously. She looked at me soulfully through her veil of tears. Her flushed face looked anguished. "No, he doesn't know about this, sweetheart. I don't think he needs to know. It really would break his heart. He loves the bones of you. Imagine how he would feel if he were to know that you were not his own. I'm quite sure it would tear him apart, limb from limb."
"So it's fine not to break his heart, but it's all right to break mine, is it?" I said sarcastically.
"Well, Dr. Huxley felt I should let you know about your real father, so that you can seek him out to get to know him better. If you can find him, of course, and that, of course, is a big if." I felt as if I'd been run over by a combine harvester and spat out by the machine. My mind was a whirl, my emotions in turmoil, my thoughts confused. I didn't know what to feel or think. "I know this is an awful shock for you, sweetheart, but I'm not going to kid. I do feel significantly relieved to get this off my chest finally. You know, Dr. Huxley was absolutely right about that. I already feel as if a weight has been lifted off my shoulders."
"Well, I'm very glad you feel relieved, Mother, because if you must know, I feel anything but. You've handed the weight over to me. I feel like the kid standing on the road accidentally mown down by a forklift truck, as if I'd been tossed into limbo with everything I thought I knew about myself lying scattered around in smithereens. I don't even know who I am anymore. If I'm not my dad's son, then who am I? Where do I come from?" "Don't be so angry, sweetheart. I've had to live with a secret all my life. It's been eating away at me like a worm burrowing away in an apple. It has a lot to do with my depression and anxiety issues that I've been experiencing over the years, along with the perpetual guilt I feel." "Who is he?" I asked. "My real father, I mean. Does he even know about my existence?"
My mother took a big glug of her coffee that was now icy cold, but she barely noticed. Her eyes stared fixedly into space, as though she'd seen a bug on the wall or a leak on the ceiling that she hadn't noticed before.
"Look at me, Mother."
"Your father looks exactly like you, your real father, I mean. You're the splitting image of him. I've not seen him for many years. His name is Connor Grayson."
"Connor Grayson,"
I repeated, rolling the name on my tongue. "That's right," said my mother. "He was not the settling down type of man, never pretended to be either. I remember he even told me when we first met that our relationship would never amount to anything serious. He was a maverick, enjoyed nothing better than living off-grid in the natural world, far from any human habitation, which is why he went to live in the Alaskan wilderness. When I learnt where he was living, I wasn't the least bit surprised. But locating him won't be easy, unless of course I can contact his sister, who lives not far from here. I often see her in passing at the bus stop. She gives me a wave often. Very nice lady."
But why did you not tell him about me?
It's complicated, said my mother. I was in a relationship with 2 men at the time, one being your father, of course. They didn't know about each other, so when I discovered I was pregnant, I wasn't exactly sure who the father was. I wasn't a floozy son, never. I just really liked both men at the time. I couldn't decide whom I liked more. So I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, but I knew I had a decision to make, and it was a no-brainer for me. I decided to tell your dad that he had made me pregnant. I knew he was the settling down type. He'd definitely make the better father. Once he knew I was pregnant, he popped the question without hesitation. The rest is history, of course. I wasn't sure an intrepid explorer or adventurer like Connor would react too happily about my being pregnant. He was a lone wolf. If I'd married him, I'd have ended up living off-grid in the middle of nowhere. You know me, son. I love my creature comforts. The idea of living in the sticks with a composting toilet or a smelly outhouse is not my idea of a great time. For a while, maybe, but most certainly not indefinitely. Connor loved all that sort of stuff. Fishing, hunting, hiking, exploring, growing your own vegetables, living off the land. That was what he was all about. I was much more socially inclined than he was. Long term, we would have never worked out. We both knew it. We had different dreams.
So let's get this right. You lied to Dad. You lied to Connor. You lied to both men.
No, I finished it with Connor. He didn't know I was pregnant at the time. I told him that this adventuring lifestyle was certainly not for me. He seemed relieved, which really was rather a blow to my self-esteem, but there you go.
So I'm right to assume you had a DNA test to establish that I am, in fact, Connor's son?
Of course not, sweetheart. I didn't need to do that. You're beginning to sound exactly like Dr. Huxley. He asked me exactly the same thing. You don't need a DNA test, son. Not in a month of Sundays. I just need to look at you and know that you are Connor's boy. There isn't an ounce of your father's Scandinavian blood running in your bones. But I can see Connor's indigenous American roots in your look. It's obvious to see. As you can imagine, my head was spinning in circles, having to assimilate these appalling revelations. Me and my father were like 2 peas in a pod, with interests in common that had increased over the years, bringing us close together. I regarded my dad as my very best friend in the entire world, and now my mother was forcing me to keep this insidious, dark secret from him. In truth, I wasn't sure that I was even capable of maintaining this duplicitous, guileful charade from my father. But my mother was absolutely right. It would break his heart to learn the truth. For if my feelings were anything to go on, I didn't want my father to experience any of them. My heart felt crushed like an ostrich egg that had been cracked wide open, vulnerable, insecure, uncertain, confused, and exceedingly disorientated. Naturally, I did some research as to the whereabouts of my biological father. I found that he was indeed living off-grid in Alaska, as I had suspected. I found out the details of his location from his sister. My mother occasionally saw her at the bus stop, so it was easy to find out his details. I learnt that she visited him a couple of times a year. I felt it was important to get to know the man, and at the very least let him know I was his son. I informed his sister very graciously that I needed to see Connor about a very delicate matter, but I gave no more information. Before long I was invited to spend the weekend with Connor at his off-grid cabin in Alaska, and the surprising thing about it all is that no questions were actually asked about the nature of my visit, which I thought was exceedingly odd. I was a city slicker through and through, with about as much experience of the natural world as a domestic tabby, who falsely believes the feeding machine in your kitchen is some kind of a strange tree that grows cat pellets at random. I had lived in New York all my life, so going to Alaska was going to be a great big eye-opener for me. I had heard about the scenic, resplendent beauty of this wondrous place. I was exceedingly intrigued by the mountains, glaciers, volcanoes, tundra, lakes, highway passes and exquisite coastline, but I certainly wasn't prepared to come so close and personal to such arresting beauty. I was fortunate to find a driver in Fairbanks willing to go the extra mile on my behalf and drop me off for the weekend at my father's place. Ironically, he knew the remote cabin exceedingly well, so a little serendipity came into play that was most warmly welcomed on my part. I was heartily relieved that Connor's cabin was in an area accessible by road, for my worst fears was his cabin was so remote that you could only access it by plane.
You're not from around here, are you? My driver teased. Sorry, son, but I can always pick up the city slickers a mile away. Not to put too fine a point on it, they do stick out rather like a sore thumb. Alaskan boys from the last frontier, well, they look like they belong. But you look rather like a fish out of water, if you don't mind my saying so. Even though physically you've got that Alaskan look about you, the strong body, the well-developed muscles, but your less than confident demeanour gives the game away, I'm afraid. You're right, I said. That's very astute of you to observe. I'm from New York. I'm a little out of my depth, I have to admit, but I'm just a tad disappointed it's so brazenly obvious to you. Thought as much, said the man. My name is J.C. That's what everyone around here calls me. He gave me a friendly grin and a big wink. He had the whitest teeth I'd ever seen. I'm Weston Finnegan, I said. Well, you've come at a good time of year, Weston. Alaska is exceedingly magnificent, especially in spring. May is our driest month of the year, you'll be glad to know. Tell me to keep my butt out of your business, but how do you happen to know Connor? He's not the most forthright, outgoing or social of people. I know he keeps himself to himself. You do get people in Alaska a lot like him. That's why they come out here, to live off-grid, get close to nature, lost in the wilderness, avoiding people at every cost. Connor's like that, you know, loves avoiding the hoi polloi. I don't know Connor. My mother did years ago. They used to date. You're not, said the driver, almost stalling on the road in his astonishment. You're not his son, are you? A son that he doesn't even know about. You look awfully like him. Something like that. The man chuckled. Ha ha! This is a turn-up for the books. Connor a father. Who would have thought it? Not me, that's for sure. How do you think he's going to take it? I asked wryly. The news, I mean. Most things to Connor are water off a duck's back, but learning you're his son, well, that's like a landmine going off in your face. I can't imagine how he would take it. But then he is a good man, a true Alaskan big fellow, with a very big heart on him. But I warn you, he's reticent, private, very, very self-contained. Don't be offended by that, especially if he doesn't talk much. He's a man of few words, shall we say, but he's very well liked around these parts. Those that do get the chance to know the man, for he is elusive, let me tell you, like some of the wild animals out here. I stared outside the window, waves of doubt drifting through my mind, like a lost boat at sea. I began to seriously doubt whether looking for Connor had been such a good idea after all. Perhaps I'd be opening a can of worms, making things 1,000 times worse. But I did have the right to meet my father, surely, despite the bizarre, outlandish circumstances. He also had the right to meet his own son, didn't he? It was a magnificent spring morning. The mountain air was fresh, crisp, dewy, clean, while the soft sunshine infused, bespeckled the landscape with a gentle, ethereal golden glaze that, like a magic wand, caused everything to twinkle, sparkle and shimmer under its bedazzling shafts of pretty light, so that the viridescent, resplendent greens looked greener, richer, lusher, the cobalt sky bluer, while the silvery lakes reminded me of jewelled mirrors, as on their gleaming surfaces pictures of the landscape floated like wispy thin paper boats on the water. Then there were the masterful, powerful, undulating, graceful curls and twists of the mountains, the glaciers, the volcanoes, rising up into the skies with solid foundations that denoted strength, power, abiding respect. "You'll be glad to know, son, it's not long now, we'll be there soon," said J.C., as we passed the prettiest alpine meadow, full of colourful spring flowers, such as Alaskan primroses, elegant paintbrushes, dwarf dogwoods, wild sweet peas, forget-me-nots, lupines and Siberian phlox. They were bursting into bloom, caressing the meadows in bright bursts of vibrant colour, from pinks, yellows, purples and blues. I also noticed a couple of moose grazing in the pastures happily, with racks on them that even intimidated me, they were so enormous.
It was when the heavy-duty rubber wheels of JC's truck seamlessly glided over some rough terrain with a few crunching sounds beneath wheels, then the odd bump, shudder and wobble. But finally it pulled up to park outside the cutest fairy tale-like Hansel and Gretel wooden cabin that I've ever seen. It was so enchanting, nestled in the heart of the woods, as if it had always belonged there, as much as the arresting fauna and flora, as the tall spruce trees that surrounded it on every side just looked so much in place, as if they'd always been there. This was quite literally a cabin in the woods. In a trice my nerves got the better of me. I physically began to shake as JC pulled up the handbrake, switched off the engine, looking directly at me with a pair of inquiring eyes. "Ready?" he asked. "I'm already feeling nervous for you, brother." "I don't think I can do this," I stammered. I think we should go back." "With a defeatist attitude like that, son, you would never make it out here in Alaska. This is big boy country. It's for the tough, the brave, the strong, the courageous. Sometimes in life you have to face your fears head on. Alaskan men, we're good at facing our fears. It runs in our blood. You would do well to learn from the best." Before I could protest, I noticed a clean-shaven man with wavy dark hair, olive skin and hazel eyes trotting out of the log cabin towards the truck. He was handsome, well-built, muscular, strong, wearing a red plaid jacket, blue Levi jeans, and rugged all-weather boots. The scariest part of it all was that I could see myself in him, as if I was looking at myself back in the mirror. It was a surreal feeling, one I wasn't exactly sure I liked. "Bloody hell," said JC, as he watched my father moving towards the truck. "Knock my cotton socks off. You two are the splitting image of each other. I hadn't realized until now how striking the resemblance is. If your father does not know he has a son, one look at you will affirm he most certainly has. He will know it, believe me, you mark my words, he will." "Hello, JC," said the raspy, warm voice of the man peering at him through the driver's side of the window. "It's been a while." "It has," said JC. "I've brought your guest along with me," he said, indicating to me in the back. As I climbed out of the truck, Connor stared at me. His eyes grew wide, his mouth dropped open, the colour drained from his skin, as if he'd seen a ghost. For a second he never said a thing, but just gave me a brief nod, indicating for me to follow him into the cabin, while he removed my backpack from the truck and brought it indoors for me. He nodded to JC, thanking him for bringing me there, and bid him farewell. I could see JC's mouth the words to me, "Good luck," and then he was gone. Connor indicated for me to take a seat in the kitchen as he busied himself over a gas burner, preparing me a warm cup of tea. For a while he avoided any eye contact with me. His fingers were trembling violently. He seemed nervous and twitchy, almost uncertain about what to do or to say next. "There you go," he said, handing me a mug of tea. "I put 2 sugars in it. We like our sugar here in Alaska. Everything in Alaska has to be sweet." "So what do you think of Alaska?" "It's beautiful," I said, taking a sip of the hot tea, which helped steady my nerves somewhat. "That's a fine way to put it. Beautiful it most certainly is, but beauty also comes with a lot of pain. It's treacherous in this part of the world, especially in the winter months. It's not an easy life by any manner of means, I can assure you." "Well, why would you live out here then?" I asked. "Something in here," said Connor, pointing directly to his heart. "It's hard to explain, really, but I need to be in nature. I need to be with the birds, the bees, the wild animals, the mountains. It makes me feel intrinsically alive. In a city like New York, where my sister lives, well, I would be lost there. Here I'm at peace, content, very happy. I like the way life flows over here. It's smooth, peaceful, cathartic." "I think I get it," I said. "What's your name, boy?" asked the man, his steely eyes now focusing on my face. "Weston Finnegan," I said. "I guessed as much," said the man. "You're Julia's son." "That's right," I stammered. "Me and your mother, we go way back. I met her once at a friend's barbecue in New York, Upper Manhattan, where I was living at the time. Your mother,
She stole my heart, shall we say. I fell for her, hook, line and sinker. I was very glad when she ended things between us. As the way things were going, I was seriously beginning to think I could not live without her. I knew there was another man in the picture. Of course, she didn't know I knew all about him, but I did as much as I assume he must have known about me. I don't think your mother could decide between the two of us. Should I go for the Boston cream pie or for the Danish pastry? When your mother called off our relationship, shall we say, in my gut, I knew she was pregnant. It was a hunch of mine, a very big hunch, but I figured out she decided that I wasn't a keeper. I can't say I blame her, really. She knew I was a wild man. To settle down with me indefinitely would mean settling down to this kind of rugged lifestyle off the beaten track. I knew it wouldn't be fair on her to live a rough life like this, for it's not for the faint-hearted, and let's just say Julia loved to surround herself with luxuries.
So you know who I am, then?
I suspected for a very long time I might have a son or daughter. My sister passed your mother in Walmart one day, stopped dead in her tracks when she saw you standing next to your mother at the shopping trolley. I think you must have been about 8 at the time. She knew at once you were my son. You were the splitting image of me when I was your age. I can see what she was talking about, for when you got out of the truck earlier, I thought I was going to pass out from the shock. Looking at you is like looking at a younger version of myself. It's very disturbing.
And you chose not to say anything?
Well, what was the point? By all accounts, you were happy. You had a father figure who loved you as his own. Why would I want to come along and pull the carpet up beneath your feet? What did I have to offer you anyway? I also knew that when you were older, you could come and find me yourself. And it seems I'm right. Here you are.
Is that why you didn't ask me any questions when I said I needed to see you about a delicate matter?
Yes, I knew it was you. It had to be. I've been expecting you. It's very good to finally meet you, son.
My father and I were getting on so well that it was decided I was to spend 2 weeks with him in the wilderness. But it was on the second night of my stay that I was awoken to hear my father talking to someone. I remember thinking it was really odd, because there was no one to talk to out in the remote woods of the Alaskan wilderness, and my father was a man of few words anyway, and it was very unlikely that he would be speaking to himself, so I crept out of the kitchen cautiously and peeked out of the door onto the wraparound porch. And what I saw was so astonishing, I seriously doubted that I was even awake. I had to be dreaming, I thought. This couldn't be real, could it? For sitting there on the floor of the wraparound porch with his finger dipped into a large jar of peanut butter was a Bigfoot. As a young boy, I had loved books about Pooh Bear with his fingers tucked into a jar of honey. Well, this creature was revelling in the peanut butter that dribbled and draped his fingers in curtains of caramel-coloured goo, which he scooped into his mouth with so much appreciation that it was almost comical to watch.
"Is that nice, Hodge?" came my father's voice. "Is that nice? I knew you would like it."
This anomalous creature was possibly more at home with my father than even I was at this stage of our relationship. I sensed he was a juvenile based on his behaviour, but this thing was huge. And when I say huge, I mean huge. It looked remarkably human, with ape-like influences to its appearance, most notably seen in the long arms, the pyramid-shaped head, and the long, dark, flowing brown hair that swathed his entire body. I noticed he was looking at my father with comical, deep-set dark eyes, and appeared to be chattering away so very fast in a language that I couldn't understand, as if he expected my father to understand everything he was saying. All of a sudden, the Bigfoot's body straightened like a pencil. His torso and legs started to stiffen. His head swiveled around in my direction. His dark eyes bored into mine. For a moment our eyes were locked in a stare. The creature then bolted away, so very fast, the jar of peanut butter still in his hands.
"Oh dear," said my father, seeing me standing in the doorway looking startled out of my skin. "I think you scared off poor little Hodge. He's not used to strangers. He's a very chatty, gregarious character. Always talks non-stop. But he's not accustomed to people, with the exception of myself, you could say. I suppose I've grown on him. He has learnt to trust me over the years. But you're a whole new phenomenon for him. He's not sure he can trust you."
"A Bigfoot," I stammered. "A Bigfoot? You're friends with a Bigfoot? I'm from New York. We don't even believe the fictitious creature is real. I feel as if my view of reality has been seriously shifted. I never envisaged a Bigfoot could possibly be real. I thought he was a mythical creature of legend." I said this, grabbing a chair, holding on to it so tightly to prevent myself from collapsing from the sheer shock of it all.
"You're going to be all right, aren't you?" asked Connor. "You look like you've seen a ghost."
I just can't get it. You're friendly with a Bigfoot."
"I am, as it happens," said my father. "Very friendly with little Hodge. Although he's not so little, is he? I mean, the creature's easily over 7 foot tall. Probably 500 pounds or more. And he'll be getting bigger when he begins to fill out, that's for sure. But now that he knows you're here, I doubt I shall be seeing him for a little while. He's a very evasive fellow. His kind always are. Like to be left alone, not bothered by the human species. Don't trust us an inch. Can't say I blame them. I'm like that myself, so I guess we get on very well with each other. We kind of get each other, I suppose."
"How did you get to be friends with a Bigfoot? How's that even possible?"
"Well, I was chopping some firewood one morning when I heard a strange muffled sound. I remember thinking, what the heck? It sounded like a human being sobbing. It's like someone or someone was terribly upset. Now, here in Alaska, with the Alaskan Triangle, all the missing people reports, you hear all kinds of strange things that go on around here. People in these parts over the centuries have claimed to see ghostly apparitions in the woods, strange lights, hear disembodied voices. When I heard that sound, truly I thought it was a ghostly apparition. There are no people in these parts, so what else could it have been? My curiosity was naturally elevated. I'm a very nosy person, so I was naturally drawn to the sound, and that was when I saw Hodge for the very first time. He was sitting there on a fallen log that was covered with fungi and mosses, looking desperately sorry for himself, as if the whole world had come crashing down upon his shoulders. I don't know why, but I moved towards him to see if I could be of some help. He was so human. He seemed so desperately upset. I really wanted to comfort him. I guess I didn't even consider my own safety at the time."
"Why was Hodge so upset?" I asked.
"Would you believe it? His little carcass of squirrel was completely covered in hundreds or thousands of carpenter ants. Hodge was very upset about this. His meal was now ruined. He was trying his level best to shake off all the ants off the carcass, but to no avail. Unfortunately, carpenter ants are very persistent, even against an angry Bigfoot."
"But couldn't he have eaten the carpenter ants on the carcass? I mean, after all, it's extra protein. Why would he have been bothered about the ants? I'm sure Bigfoots would eat slugs and stuff like that. So why would ants bother him?"
"Granted, carpenter ants rarely ever bite humans. They're not poisonous either. But I think Hodge wanted to enjoy his squirrel unadulterated. I could see his food was very important to him. He was desperately upset. He didn't like the carpenter ants on his squirrel, any more than you might not be partial to jelly on a peanut butter sandwich. I can't say I blame Hodge. I'm with him on this one. I dare say on every mouthful you'd possibly feel live ants that you didn't manage to swallow crawling around your mouth, tickling, nipping your gums. Not very pleasant. I remember looking at him and telling him it would be all right, and even if his dinner was ruined, I had some yummy peanut butter back at the cabin that he might enjoy. That was far tastier than any squirrel could ever be."
"Surely he didn't understand what you said?"
"Well, I must say my voice seemed to soothe him. I don't think he did understand me, but he did watch me. He was very upset, but I do think I calmed him down. He was so cute at the time, only about 3 foot tall, with the sweetest brown button eyes you've ever seen that melted my heart like chocolate. He was wary of me, but very curious nevertheless. Anyway, he kept a distance from me. So I went back to the cabin. I brought out a jar of peanut butter and another jar of honey. I put them far away from the cabin. I watched him eating the peanut butter. The transformation on his face was priceless, rather like the boy who pulled out an onion from his Christmas stocking, only to discover it had morphed into a dream toy train for him. The jubilant look on his face was just like that. I can assure you that Carpenter Ant-infested Squirrel was far from his mind as he tucked into the peanut butter with so much gusto. He regularly came back for more, day after day, week after week, month after month, until I brought the peanut butter right up to the house. It wasn't long before his wariness faded. He became very used to me. He's a rarely chatty fellow, loves to talk and talk and talk in a strange language that I don't understand. I'd be blowed if I know what he's actually saying, but boy, does he make me smile. I think he sees me as a friend. Sometimes he brings me a leg of venison or a fish. I've seen his mother around too, but I've only had a very brief sighting of her peeking at me from behind the trees. Bashful, shy, reticent she is, but she has grown partial to the peanut butter, so she's happy about the fringe benefits of Hodge's relationship with me. Otherwise, I'm quite sure she would discourage it. You know, it can get very lonely out here. It's good to have a human-like friend. Hodge is exceedingly human. More human than some people, I know. He's very good company, lots of fun, very intelligent. Do you think there are other people like you, I asked, people who have secret friendships with Bigfoot out here in Alaska? Oh, I'm in no doubt about it. I'm sure there are, but they're not talking. Who can blame them? Possibly all over America, if you want my humble opinion. I imagine others feel exactly the same as I do. I would never tell a cryptozoologist about Hodge. I don't give a stuff what they want to prove to the world about the existence of these creatures. Who cares? I have a friendship with Hodge, a friendship I want to protect, as I would do the safety of anything that I held dear. You're the only person who knows about my friendship with Hodge, and I would appreciate your discretion in the matter.
Of course, I said. My lips are sealed. Anyway, if I did talk about a Bigfoot in New York, I'd probably be ridiculed. Why do you call him Hodge? Well, when I asked him his name once, his language is so peculiarly strange, I thought he said Hodge or something like that. So I decided to call him Hodge. I really like it. I think it suits him. It's a cheeky name. To cut a long story short, I had a fabulously wonderful trip to Alaska, and so began the most phenomenal relationship with my real father, who taught me to adore the natural world. I'm not a man that enjoys keeping secrets from my own family, so one day I told my father, who raised me, what I actually knew. I felt he had the right to know that I wasn't his birth son. Dad, I said, I've got something to tell you, but I'm not sure you're going to like it. I don't like the sound of that, son, he said. What have you done? It's not a question of what I've done. It's more what Mother did before I was born. My father crinkled his brow. What are you talking about? Dad, please don't be mad with Mum. She never will forgive me for telling you this, but I just have to. I can't keep the secret from you any more. I'm not your real son. Not by blood, anyway. My father stopped dead in his tracks. Relief flooded over his face. So you know. She told you. She actually told you. I never thought she would. You mean you know? You know that you're not my real dad, I asked, looking completely stumped. Well, I suspected as much after you were born, said my father. You didn't physically resemble me in any way. I sent off a hair sample of yours for a DNA test. I think it was 98% guaranteed that I was not your biological father. It took me 4 weeks to open that envelope. I guess I already knew the results anyway. But you didn't mind? Mind? Of course I didn't mind, son. Look what I've gained. I've gained you, a son. You're the best friend I've ever had. I'm hardly going to look a gift horse in the mouth, am I? As far as I'm concerned, I will always be your father. Biological bloodline or not, it doesn't make a jot of difference to me. Tears streamed down my face, tears of joy, tears of relief and hope. I choked up. But you'll always be my father. Does Mum know that you know about this? Of course not, son. I don't want to rub her nose in it. I've always loved your mother.
Your mother was fickle in those days, indecisive about almost everything, including the men she dated. But when she announced to me that the father of her little bump was me, I accepted the responsibility immediately, even though I had suspicions that the child she was carrying may well not be mine. "Oh, the webs we weave, Dad," I said. "We complicate our lives so much with all these secrets." "There's nothing complicated about love, son," my father said. I'm now a married man with children of my own, considering myself to be privileged to have 2 fathers. My Alaskan father, Connor, still lives in the Alaskan wilderness. And yes, he still has a long-standing friendship with Hodge. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I don't want to go, I said, standing at the end of my bed, stamping my feet, like a petulant, precocious brat that was having a hissy fit, as I wasn't having my own way. I was fully aware of my juvenile behaviour. Of course I was, but I couldn't help myself. The anger inside me was combustible. It had been like that ever since my mother had left home 4 years ago. I could not forgive her for abandoning us in the cruel way she did, for the likes of Connor Dumbarton. My suitcase was wide open, gaping like a hungry mouth that needed feeding, but I was struggling to get packed. The last thing I wanted was to see my mother again. Indignant tears streamed down my face like sorry raindrops on a glass pane. "Why do I have to go, Dad? It's not fair. It's not fair. Why are you making me do this?" I said, glaring at him defiantly. My father's face looked melancholic. Let's just say after my mother left us 4 years ago, there was no doubt in my mind that the bright spark inside of him had burnt out, as he tried desperately to pick up the pieces of his life again. I knew my mother's fortuitous departure from our lives had hit him hard, as if he'd been run over by a freight train. I could see the sorrow in my father's steely grey eyes, and over the last 4 years it had never left his face. My grieving father now walked with a slight limp in his step, and his shoulders were hunched over, as if he'd been battered by the world, as my mother, choosing to leave the both of us so cold-heartedly, had done this to him, and I hated her for it. Even though my father was now in his mid-40s, he looked more like he was in his late 50s, early 60s, or even 70s, as his haggard skin was feathered with fine lines, and the area around his eyes was like the crinkles you see in a packet of potato chips. And his once dark hair had sadly grown grey within weeks after my mother left us, which clearly shows the dramatic impact her leaving had on our lives. "Sweetheart," said my father to me, "no one is making you do anything you don't want to do. I know it's hard, but you do need to go to America. It's the right thing to do. If you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for me. If you do this one thing, you will make me a very happy man indeed. Remember, you won't be away for long. And if you're desperately unhappy, I will come and get you myself. And that's a promise," he assured me, giving me a salute. "Please, Lucy, give your mother a chance, will you? Don't be so unreasonably hard on her. Before you know it, you'll be back home with me where you belong. You never know. You might actually enjoy yourself. You're going to an enviably beautiful part of the world. And I'm sure some of your friends at school would happily trade places with you to go to America in a heartbeat. It's a spectacular country." "Well, they're welcome to do just that. They can have my plane ticket as far as I'm concerned. See if I care. Dad, I hate her. I really hate her. And I don't want to go to America. It's so far away from home. Why do I have to go? Why don't I have any rights concerning my own life? It's not fair. I'm old enough to make my own decisions. I don't need adults making them for me." "Sweetheart, calm down," said my father, sitting down on the end of the bed beside me, taking my hand in his. My father had beautiful hands with long fingers,
And when he took my hand, I always felt incredibly safe, as if nothing could ever go wrong in this big bad world of ours, of which so much really does. Even at my young tender age, I was profoundly aware of this fact, as let's not kid, life can be brutally hard.
Of course you have your rights. You're allowed to express your opinions. But I would like you to see things from my perspective for a moment, as your father. Look, I know you're mad with your mother, but it's time to let go of your rage. Your mother gave you into my charge because you didn't want to go and live with her. Imagine how it must have cut her to the quick to hear you tell her you never wanted to speak to her ever again. It broke her heart, it did, that you refused to go to America with her. She could have put her foot down and made you go with her, and she would have been perfectly within her rights to do so. But she did not. She let you live with me here in England. Your mother needs to see you from time to time, Lucy. Surely you understand that. You cannot shut her off like this. It's not healthy. I've been speaking to her recently on my cell phone, and she's been begging to see you again. She misses the bones of you, Lucy. She understands, of course, that you're very aggrieved with her, but she really wants to make it up to you. She does, and she says you will love it where she's living. Her husband Connor, who was widowed from his last wife, has 2 boys round about your age from that marriage, who are literally dying to meet their stepsister. She has told them all about you.
I don't care about any of that. I'm 15 years old, Dad. Why are you sticking up for Mum after everything she did to you? She sandblasted our lives as if we were the sandstone in a quarry. And you're being nice to her. I just don't understand it. Why are you so forgiving? She betrayed us, Dad. Why aren't you angry?
You forget that I was married to your mother for 14 years, Lucy. I loved her very much. You don't stop caring for someone when you've been with them for a long time, even if they hurt you badly. Life does not work like that. Your mother may have cheated on me, but there are 2 sides to every story. Clearly something was not working in our marriage, which I failed to see. It's a little like a leak in the roof of your house that you wantonly ignore until finally you realize it's fallen on top of you, and you can't dismiss it any longer, as the problem is staring you blazingly in the face. If the truth be told, Lucy, I was clearly not giving your mother everything she needed in her relationship with me at the time. I do remember her expressing her frustration and extreme misgivings with me, that I never wanted to go anywhere with her. She thought I was socially retarded. Your mother loved interacting with people all the time. She'd be running here and running there. She'd be up and down like a yo-yo. She wasn't interested in sitting back to read a novel. She wanted to be out and about, doing things all the time, painting the town red, so to speak. By contrast, I wanted to chill, so the cracks in the relationship were beginning to show. We both wanted different things out of life. And for a relationship to successfully work, you need to be on the same page with your partner. I failed your mother. She wouldn't have cheated on me otherwise. I have taken full responsibility for the demise of our relationship. I suspect we were just both wrong for each other. It happens when you marry young like I did, and are swept off your feet by the bubble of your infatuation.
Don't make excuses for her, Dad. Mum's a slapper. She clandestinely hooked up with an American man when she started taking those riding treks into the countryside. Don't you remember? That was where she met him, Dad. They had an affair behind your back. He was living in the UK for 2 years to get a company of his started out here. You knew nothing about what was going on until Mum told you she was in love with someone else. And then she just buggered off with this man to America. She dumped you, Dad.
like an old sack of seeding potatoes that she no longer wanted. How can you possibly be nice about her after what she did to you? I just don't get it. I really don't. As I told you, sweetheart, nothing is always just black and white. There's always the murky in-between grey areas that can be easily overlooked. Let's just say when me and your mother first got married, we were very attracted to each other physically. We were young, callow, whimsical, naive, and believed our attraction to each other was enough to sustain our relationship long term. But sadly, down the tributaries of life, we soon learnt we had nothing in common. I think we ignored the elephant in the room after you came along. We muddied along steadily and did everything we could to make the relationship work. But I think your mother struggled with me. If your mother had not left me, Lucy, for Connor Dumbarton, she'd have left me anyway for somebody else, or even to be on her own, even if no cheating was involved. Your mother found me boring. She wanted more for herself and more for her life. And I respect her for that, Lucy. You have to do what's right for you in life, or you're not honouring your truth. You cannot possibly hate her for that. You're not boring, Dad. Where did you get that idea from? Don't put yourself down like this. Mum is the one to blame here. You deserved so much better than her, Dad. She treated you like dirt. It's disgusting. And her new husband, what's his name again? Connor Dumbarton, said my father. Connor Dumbarton was pretty dumb, if you ask me. To get involved with a married woman. He's as bad as Mum is. They deserve each other. I hope they both rot in hell. You don't mean that, Lucy. That's the anger talking. You're kind, Lucy. You've got a good heart. So lashing out like this, of course I understand it. But it's unnecessary. And I'm quite sure Connor Dumbarton is a very, very nice man. Maybe your mother found she had a lot in common with him. She found he met a need within her that I was unable to supply. Despite everything, Lucy, your mother is a very good woman. I'm sure she's not proud of how things panned out, and regrets some of the mistakes she made along the way, as do I. The great thing about mistakes is you learn from them, Lucy, and that is invaluable to one's personal growth. Beyond all that, sometimes in life you just need to forgive. You cannot hate your mother forever. She loves you with all her heart. You are her little girl, and nothing will ever change that. She needs to see you, Lucy, and even if you refuse to admit it, you also need your mother. You should not sever your relationship with her like this, based on what she did back then. It's not serving you, sweetheart, to react so negatively towards your mother. In truth, it makes you bitter. At the end of the day, all you're hurting is yourself. Dad, don't you get it? I do not need my mother. She doesn't need me. I'd be happy if I never ever saw her again as long as I live. Mum cheated on you. I can't get over how nice you're being about her. I just don't understand it. We were happy as a family until she told you she was leaving you for that American man. And now she's actually married to him. I can't believe she did that to you and to us. I hate her for it. As I keep telling you, Lucy, and I hope I'm not sounding like a broken record, but you don't mean that. We all say things we don't mean when we're hurting. It's human nature. We often attack the very things we love the most when we are sad. If you didn't love your mother, you wouldn't be so infuriated with her, would you? Both love and hate are very passionate emotions. If you really were insouciant and indifferent about your mother, you would not be reacting like this. Despite everything, I believe under the layers of your denial, you love your mother very much indeed. I'm personally glad you're going to America. You haven't seen your mother for 4 years. That needs to be rectified. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by how welcome the Dumbartons will make you feel in their home. And I am of the opinion that you're going to have an amazing time in America. Maybe you won't even want to come back.
Are you kidding, Dad? Of course I'll come back. I told you, I'd be happy if I never saw Mum again. It's only because of you I'm choosing to go to America. Not that I'm choosing at all. Otherwise I'd never go, even if you paid me $1 million.
Well, it goes without saying that Cupcake and Sprinkle here will miss you almost as much as I do. Almost.
On hearing their names being mentioned, our two beloved basset hounds began to bark excitedly, as if expressing their agreement that I would indeed be missed greatly while I was away. In a trice the sound of the doorbell trilling through the house created pandemonium and momentary chaos, as with wagging tails and excited barking, our two boisterous dogs eagerly bolted out of my bedroom, down the staircase of our 350-year-old cottage. The whole house rattled and shook on its foundations as the dogs charged through the house like two rockets being discharged into space.
"Let me guess," said my father. "That must be Paul."
My father made a sympathetic face.
"That poor boy. He's going to be missing you a bunch while you're away, Lucy. The two of you have been inseparable since you were knee-high to a grasshopper and trotting around the place in diapers. This will be the longest you've been away from each other, I would imagine."
It was true. Paul Dragmonger was my best friend, and was like a brother to me, and was older than me by a couple of months. I knew leaving him would really suck, but my father had refused to buy a ticket for him to come with me to America. He felt I needed to go alone. "Send him up, Dad. I hope you'll help me with my packing, because I can't decide what I need to take," I said, wiping the remnants of my tears away from my face. I certainly didn't want Paul to see me in such a sorry state, but I so wished he was coming with me to America. We had always done things together as a team, from going to concerts, parties and vacations.
"We'll do so," said my father. "I'm just hoping Paul can talk some sense into that head of yours and make you realize that going to America will be an awe-inspiring adventure for you."
"It would be, Dad, if I was going to be going with you and with Paul. But this is hardly what I consider a holiday. It's more like paying a debt that I don't want to pay, or going to a dentist to have teeth extracted. It sucks big time."
"Well, I better go and answer the door before Paul breaks it down," my father teased, "or before Sprinkle and Cupcake scratch the wood even more fiercely than they already have done."
I heard my father charging down the staircase with his leather boots. The stairs groaned under my father's substantial weight, as he was a tall man, and the house was incredibly old. Soon I guessed he was at the front door, where the dogs were scratching to get out, and making those excitable squeaking sounds. I could hear my father talking to Paul in the entrance hall. I knew, of course, they were talking about me. I heard Paul say, "Yes, Mr. Calcaccio, I'm really going to miss her. It's going to be weird without her around. Where is she?"
"She's upstairs, trying her level best to pack. But as yet, nothing has succeeded in being placed into her suitcase. She's stalling for time, I suspect, procrastinating rather too much," I heard my father say. "She's in a right cranky mood. Doesn't want to go to America. You know what she's like when she's resolutely stubborn."
"I know, Mr. Calcaccio," I heard Paul laugh. "I think it's good she's going to America, though. I really do. It would be cool to go with her, but she does need to go alone. She needs time with her mum." I made a face, hearing Paul say that. He was my best friend, for God's sake. He shouldn't be talking like this to my father.
"Very well said, Paul. Every daughter needs their mother," I heard my father say. "I'm glad you appreciate this, Paul. Maybe you can drill some common sense into my daughter. I'll try my best, Mr. Calcaccio. But you know what Lucy's like. She's as stubborn as old boots. Shifting her opinion is like drilling into the core of the earth itself. Well, you go upstairs, Paul. Help her with her packing, will you? She hasn't got a thing in that suitcase of hers yet. She's about as enthusiastic about going abroad as I am about doing my accounts.
Seconds later, familiar feet padded up the staircase at a fast pace. I knew they belonged to Paul, as the staircase barely groaned under his weight, as Paul, although tall for his age, was lanky and didn't weigh terribly much. Then there he was, standing in the doorway of my bedroom, looking melancholic. He lived in the cottage next door to ours, and since we were toddlers we'd practically lived in each other's pockets. Paul was the late lamb in his family, the unexpected baby his mother birthed late in life. So all his brothers and sisters had long since left home, so he'd been raised solo by his parents, almost as if he was an only child. I was his immediate next-door neighbour, so we literally did everything together, from when we were trotting around in diapers, with pacifiers in our mouths. Paul became like a brother to me. I'd never seen him look out of sorts before. I noticed on this morning he didn't appear to have run a comb through his blonde hair, that looked unusually wild, as if he'd just got out of bed the wrong side, and was rather dishevelled. He was usually so well put together, wearing chinos and smart pinstripe shirts. He always looked rather debonair, even when he dressed very casual. It was just the way he was. But today he looked rather battered and worn out, with telltale dark circles under his eyes, which made me secretly suspect he was somewhat sleep-deprived. I realized in that moment Paul really was terribly sad to see me go to America, even though I'd only be gone for 4 weeks. But at that time of my life, 4 weeks was an agonizingly long period of time, and the thought of 4 weeks away from home, the home that I knew and loved, was objectionable to say the very least. "Don't just stand there in the doorway, Paul, like a guest," I said, gesturing for him to come into my bedroom. "Why are you staring at me like a gog-eyed goldfish, as if you've never seen me before a day in your life?" "Oh, am I? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. It's just I can't believe you're going all the way to America. I'm going to miss you, Lucy, not being around for the summer holidays. It's a bummer, but I guess I'll live. It's going to be strange without you around, that's all. I'm going to be doing everything on my own from now on. I guess it's going to be a rather lonely holiday." "Tell me about it," I told him, making a contorted face. "I don't want to go abroad any more than you want me to leave. But Dad is piling on all the pressure for me to go, on my mother's account, of course. He feels desperately sorry for her, even though she was the one that kicked him in the guts all those years ago. Can you believe that? The good news is, if it's any consolation to the both of us, we can at least talk to each other and communicate every day on our cell phones. It's not like we'll be out of touch, is it?" "It's not the same, though, is it, Lucy?" said Paul. "I mean, talking on a phone isn't the same as seeing someone in person. I'm sorry, but it's not." "I know it's not. You're right about that, Paul. But you have to admit it's better than nothing. I just wish I wasn't going abroad to be with my mother. I hate her for what she did to us. I can't believe she's insisted that I go and stay with her. She's got a real nerve, don't you think, demanding I go. I'm 15 years old, for goodness sake. I should have rights. That's what it boils down to, rights." Paul looked reflective. "To be fair, Lucy, your father's right. You should meet up with your mother again. I remember she was a lovely lady. I do remember her quite well, actually. I'm sure she wants to see you again. I know she loves you very much." I snorted. "Love? Are you kidding, Paul? That woman wouldn't know the meaning of the word. What she did to me and Dad was not love. I'm sorry it wasn't. I thought at the very least you of all people, Paul, would be on my side. See things from my perspective. In a nutshell, I wouldn't be going abroad if my mother was still married to my father, would I?
Everything would be like it used to be. Things were good back then, until my mother chose to leave us, to become a selfish, self-centered prima donna and float off into the sunset like an autumn leaf on the wind. I'm not taking sides, Lucy, said Paul obsequiously. It's about doing the right thing by your mother, for the greater good, and hopefully you can mend some bridges while you're at it. I mean, you can learn from my own life if it helps you. My mother, for example, has not spoken to her own father in years, he said, sounding sad. They had a fallout many years ago, and it's had long-lasting repercussions on our family, like when you throw a stone in the water and everything ripples. Get this, my mother still cannot remember why she and her own father fell out in the way they did, which makes the whole thing all the more ridiculous. But both my grandfather and mother continue the feud, even though they don't even know what it's about. Adults can be so weird. So they've literally not spoken to each other in years, which is absolutely insane. The worst part is I've never met my mother's parents because of their dispute. And it's a shame, it really is. Neither did my older siblings, who left home a long time ago. We've all missed out because of my mother's fallout with her parents. I would personally have loved a relationship with my grandparents, but it wasn't to be, Lucy. I know my mother regrets what happened between her and her father, but both of them are far too proud and far too stubborn to reach out to each other, to settle their differences and make amends, which would actually bring healing to our family. But I doubt it will ever happen. But one day my mother will regret it when her parents die. My dad thinks that will be the moment, when she thinks what an idiot she's been, that she should have made up with them a long time ago. But by that time, it'll be all too late. With the greatest of respect, Paul, I fail to see how your mother's relationship with her own grandfather has to do with my relationship with my own mother. I think it has a whole lot as it happens. Think about it for a moment, Lucy. Imagine one day you have children of your own. Do you really want them not to have a relationship with their grandmother? You'll be doing them an injustice. I know, because I know what it feels like firsthand. If you don't fix your differences between you and your mother, you'll always live with regret of what your relationship with her could have potentially been. If you hadn't been so stubbornly obstinate, proud and opinionated, you'll be like my mother, with her relationship with her own dad, and by then it'll be too late to reach out to her, because it'll be impossibly hard to do so, because the longer you leave it, the harder it is. I'm only saying this, Lucy, not to get at you, but for your own good, because you're like a sister to me. Not that I'm any good, of course, at doling out advice. I mean, you don't want to live with regret, do you? He paused for a brief moment and said, Worst case scenario, Lucy. Imagine if something bad were to happen to your mum. If she was run over by a bus tomorrow. I bet then it would hit you hard. You'd be left with the guilt of the fact that you'd never repaired your relationship with her. And now you can't do anything about it. It happens a lot, you know, in life. People in hindsight wishing they had the balls to have made better choices and stepped away from their pride and their comfort zone by doing the right thing, making amends. My dad says the human ego gets in the way of everything and accounts for so many problems in human relationships. And I think he's right, you know. I do too, Paul. Your dad is a very clever man, and he does make some good points. But it doesn't make my going to America any easier. Besides, I don't know anything about my mother's new life. Do you realise, Paul, I know nothing about her, apart from the fact that she married a man called Connor Dumbarton, who she met here in England. I do know he came to live here for about 2 years with his 2 boys, Cameron and Hamish. He was here in England to set up an American company, which he started up in the UK. I know he was widowed at the time, as his wife tragically died of a brain aneurysm. When he came here to this country, he went on these horse riding trails on the weekend. That's where he met my mother. She secretly got into a relationship with him behind my father's back. Even I was completely unaware of what was going on. They were together for 2 years, seeing each other clandestinely, until my mother announced to Dad that she was in love with someone else, which devastated the both of us and shattered our lives quite literally. My mother went back with Connor Dumbarton to America and then married him. She wanted me to go with her, but I point-blank refused. I told her I never wanted to see her ever again. Me and my dad, we had no clue any of this was going on. And when I learnt what she had done, I hated her with a burning passion, and I still do. Paul made a sympathetic face. I get why you're angry, Lucy. I mean, if my mother did that to us, I'd also be peeved. But how come you know so little about her, since she left for England? Surely you know something about her life in America. I thought you said she was always sending you letters in the post, but you blocked her on your cell phone. That's right. She was sending me letters in the post, and she still is, as it happens, I said, walking over to my closet, fiddling around on the top shelf to retrieve a shoebox filled with my mother's letters, all addressed to me. You're kidding me, said Paul, looking rather aghast, as he stared in bewilderment at the shoebox of letters I was carrying in my hands. You mean she wrote you all these? He said, looking at the letters in admiration and wondrous awe. Are they all from your mother? I nodded. That's right, they're from her. They go back over 4 years, I told him. And you haven't opened any of them? Asked Paul, his eyes widening in surprise. I can't believe you, Lucy. Why have you not read her letters? That's seriously crazy. Because I hate her, that's why, said Lucy. I hate her. Why would I want to read anything that she writes me? I blocked her number on my cell phone. I disabled her ability to communicate with me. So my mother did the next best thing, didn't she? I said, running my hands over the envelopes. She sent me these, hoping that I'd actually read them. But guess what, Paul? I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I can see you haven't opened any of them, Paul repeated, as if he was trying to get his head around this rather startling revelation. Of course I haven't. Of course I wouldn't open any of them, Paul, I said scathingly. I told you, I don't want to have anything to do with my mother. I'm jealous of you having so many letters, Lucy, said Paul, staring at the letters enviously. I can't believe you haven't opened them. This is the way people used to communicate in the old days with each other. Imagine what it must have been like. You'd wait to hear news from your loved one abroad by post, and when the letter finally arrived, you'd be tearing it open with excitement, as if it was Christmas Day, wondering what news your loved one had to convey to you. These days, communication is pretty much instant, isn't it? But back then, you had to wait for news to arrive from across the water. Imagine what that must have been like. There must be over 400 letters here, Lucy, in this shoebox of yours. Yet you haven't opened even one of them. That's insane, if you ask me. Are you not at least a little curious to read what's inside of them? I could have torn them up a long time ago, I reminded him, but I didn't. You know how I wish someone would write me a letter on paper in an envelope like this? All I ever get is a message on my cell phone, usually in shorthand scroll, said Paul, making a face. Some of the old ways are much more exciting, before technology finally came along, to ruin the romantic side of our lives. I can't believe you haven't opened any of them yet. Even if I was wearing your shoes, and I was mad with my mother, I'd still have to read the letter she wrote me. It would be like an itch that I had to scratch. You're about as unorthodox as you can get, Lucy. You've not even been tempted, even the slightest, to open the letters. You know nothing about your mother as a consequence. It's crazy, if you ask me. I told you, I said curtly. I don't want to know anything about my mother. If you want to read the letters, Paul, you're welcome to. Be my guest. Go ahead, read them. But I don't want to know what she has to say. Besides, I've got my packing to do, haven't I? I still haven't put anything into my suitcase yet. You don't mind my reading your personal post? Paul asked me. You don't mind me opening up this whole pile of letters, reading them all? Of course I don't mind, Paul. I want nothing to do with them. You can tear them up into fine pieces, for all I care. Paul greedily grabbed the box of envelopes from my hands, as if I'd given him a box of Oreos that he wanted to munch down, and was scared I was quickly going to change my mind and suddenly retract my offer. He promptly sat down on the end of my bed, with a shoebox resting on his knees, as he fingered through the post, randomly pulling out letters and tearing them open. I guess I hadn't expected him to take up my offer, so I was somewhat thrown off guard. Paul looked like a kid in a candy store. He was opening up the letters with an eagerness that was beginning to make me a tad jealous. I had missed out on that kind of fun. I was beginning to secretly wish I could snatch the letters away from him, but I couldn't do that now. I had given him carte blanche to read them all. I tried to pack my suitcase while Paul was reading my letters, crinkling the paper in his fingers. I began hurriedly folding up sweaters and shorts, laying them messily in my suitcase. I felt significantly distracted as I watched Paul's facial expressions as he read the letters, as if in some way I could discern what they might be saying. In a trice I seemed to become even more curious about the letters that I'd wilfully neglected for so long. I was flooded with an eagerness to know what my mother had actually written to me, but I'd be damned if I would admit this to Paul, or even to myself, as it would mean I was interested in my mother. In truth, even my father had absolutely no knowledge that I'd never read the letters she had written to me. My father probably assumed I was much more clued up about my mother's life than I actually really was. In truth, I knew nothing about her life in America, and now I was going there. I had no idea about what to expect on my visit. I didn't know exactly where she lived, what the area was like, or anything about my so-called stepbrothers. Nothing at all. I was completely in the dark. "Don't mind me," said Paul nonchalantly, as if he was eating a delicious pile of pancakes with maple syrup and ice cream, and I was watching him, salivating with envy, while on a seriously deprived diet. "You get on with your packing while I read your mother's letters. This is so cool. By the time I've finished reading them, I'll know more about your mother than you do," he said proudly. The latter statement rarely pushed my buttons. I bit my lip awkwardly and snapped, "Well, as I said, I don't want to know anything about her." I could see that Paul was thoroughly enjoying reading the letters. From time to time he'd throw out tidbits of information at me, rather like the scattering of crumbs thrown to a dog under the table. And even though I was not willing to admit this, I was hungrily snatching at those crumbs. "Your mother's very sad that you refused to speak to her. She really misses you," said Paul, looking up from a letter to watch me fold my clothes and place them in the suitcase. I snorted disdainfully. "She should have thought about that, shouldn't she, before she sauntered off to America to be with Connor Dumbarton," I said sarcastically. "I can sense from your mother's letters that your mum is really reaching out to you, Lucy. She loves you a lot, you know." "Of course she doesn't love me, Paul. If she did, she'd never have left us in the cruel, callous way that she did. My mother is a prize bitch. I'm sorry, but she is. And nothing you can ever say will make me change my mind about her. If she had loved me, she'd never have bogged off to the States like she did." "Maybe she had her reasons, Lucy," said Paul, looking at me soberly. "I'm quite sure it wasn't easy to end the marriage the way she did." "Now you can see why I didn't read her letters," I said pointedly. "My mother's manipulative. Look at you. You're already feeling sorry for her, aren't you? It's pathetic. She reels you in, doesn't she? Like she did with Connor Dumbarton." "No, I'm not sorry for your mother, Lucy. You've got me wrong there. Well, maybe I am. Yes, I'm sorry her relationship with your father did not work out. For your sake. I know it tore you apart when they got divorced. But the good news is she's happy with her life. She lives in a farmhouse in Georgia and Atlanta. I believe that's a beautiful part of the world from her descriptions. It sounds idyllic, said Paul, returning to the letter he was reading. All of a sudden, Paul got incredibly excited, almost as if he was caught up in a fabulous chapter in a book that he just could not put down. He shook his head. Bloody hell! I can't believe it! This is insane! Absolutely insane! He said, unable to disguise the infectious awe in his voice. What's insane? I asked him, trying to feign a lack of interest, but my ears were wagging, a dime to a dozen. I'm not going to tell you, Lucy, he teased. I mean, you're not interested in what your mother has to say. So why should I tell you what she's written in this letter? I was now exceedingly irritated and piqued. I rushed towards Paul to snatch the letter away from him that he was reading. He held on to it fast, grinning at me from ear to ear, with a smile as wide as a Cheshire cat. I wanted to bash him across the head with one of my clothes hangers. Paul could be so infuriating at times. Give it back to me, I said. It's mine. I extended my hand, with a determined, resolute, don't you mess with me look on my face. But Paul was not biting the bait. I could tell he was enjoying my infuriation, basking in it, like a hippo in a watering hole in Africa. Paul playfully gave me a cheeky grin, tauntingly waving the letter around in front of me, which on a second failed attempt I tried desperately to grab from him. But even as I held on to the thin wispy paper, I knew I had to let go of it, because if I tugged it too hard, I'd likely tear it up, and then I would never know what the letter said. So I reluctantly retracted, resigning myself to the begging tactics a dog tends to adopt when under the dinner table, in the hope you might part with a little of the sausage you're eating. Please give it back to me, Paul, I begged. But you don't want to read any of her letters, Lucy. Remember, you're not interested in your mother's life or what she has to say. I mean, you haven't opened the letters over a period of 4 years. And now, all of a sudden you want to read this letter? Isn't that a little hypocritical? Why are you being such a jerk, Paul? You're deliberately winding me up. You can be so exasperating at times. I'm leaving for America tonight, and you're being so mean. Tell me what my mother wrote that you said is insane. I want to know, I said, almost stamping my feet. I really was being a precocious brat. I hated this side of myself, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know what was in the letter. Paul was grinning at me from ear to ear, with such a triumphant smile on his face. Lucy, you are idiosyncratic, you know that? You hate your mother with a burning passion, but now you want to know what she has to say to you in one of her letters, that for the last few years you've simply refused to read. It would be hilarious, you know, if it wasn't so dreadfully pitiful. Only because you got me excited, that's all, when you started reading the letter. I don't like being left in the dark like this. I want to know what you said was insane. And the irony is you would be left in the dark, Lucy, if you hadn't read the letter, Paul reminded me. If you're not going to give the letter to me, then at least tell me what it says, I demanded obsequiously, realizing that arguing with Paul was not going to get me anywhere, and was pretty close to useless. I would invariably be only going around and around in circles, like a hamster on a wheel. Can you not at least read me the part of her letter you thought was insane? That's all I'm asking, Paul. Paul grinned. You really are curious, aren't you, Lucy? Very well, I will read it to you, he said, straightening out his back. I'll start at the very beginning of the letter, he said, and began to read. My darling Lucy, I miss you so dreadfully much, love. Not a day goes by that I do not think of you. I just wish you would talk to me, love. There is so much I want to tell you. I can only hope you're reading my letters. But I know how resolutely stubborn you are at times, and I have a horrible feeling that every letter I'm sending you is being stashed away in a shoebox stored on top of your cupboard, forgotten and forsaken. But I will do everything in my power to reach out to you."
"Boy," chuckled Paul, "your mother knows you well, Lucy. She's already guessed you're refusing to read her letters and have stashed them away in a shoebox on top of your cupboard. But despite all that, she's still written to you anyway. You have to commend her for that. Your mother hasn't given up on you, even if you've given up on her." "It's not funny, Paul," I snapped. "Go on. Carry on reading. Don't stop." "As you know, Lucy dear, I've tried to contact you through other mediums. Nothing has worked, as you've blocked me every step of the way. Not that I blame you for that, of course. As a result, I've been sending letters to you the very old-fashioned way. I'm hoping curiosity will get the better of you, and you'll ultimately become interested enough to read my letters. I do completely understand, my dear, how you feel about me. I appreciate your anger, resentment, frustration, and extreme hurt. I tell you this in every letter, about all my regrets, and how if I could go back in time, I would do things so very differently. Of course, I'm not proud of what I did when I left your father and filed for divorce. I'm sure you both felt dreadfully betrayed. You may hate me for what I did, but you can't hate me more than I hate myself. I don't want to make excuses, really. Lucy, I don't. But long before I left your father, I knew that our relationship was living on borrowed time. I wasn't happy with him. Now, don't get me wrong, Lucy. Your father is a wonderful person, and I haven't got a bad word to say about him. But the two of us, long-term, would never ever have worked out. We had absolutely nothing in common, and wanted different things from our lives. We had very few shared interests together. The best thing that happened in our marriage was you, of course, and for that reason I never regretted marrying your father. We can both agree that you were the one gift in our lives that was absolutely not a mistake. We did try to make our relationship work on your account. We wanted you to grow up in a very stable environment, raised by two loving parents. But I just knew the roof was falling in on our lives, because it just was not working out for us." "There she goes again," I snorted in disgust. "Off on a tangent, making excuses as to why she divorced my dad. It's disgusting how manipulative she is. Now you know why I didn't read her letters," I said snidely. Paul raised one of his rather defined dark brows. As he looked at me over the letter, he let out a sigh. "Do you want me to carry on reading this letter or not, Lucy? You keep interrupting me. I haven't got to the juicy part yet." "Go on," I said begrudgingly. "Let's hear it, shall we? I bet it's not as juicy as you're making it out anyway. This is probably your way of being as manipulative as my mother." Paul continued reading, wilfully ignoring my thorny comments. "I'm hoping, Lucy, my dear, that one day you might understand why I made some of the choices I did. I'm only sorry I caused so much hurt. I appreciate why you refused to come and live with me here in America. Anyway, I'm writing to you about something unusual that'll leave you scratching your head and saying, 'What the hell?' Since it happened to me, I've been saying that to myself all the time. My new catchphrase is 'What the hell?' I'm so confounded by the experience. I keep having to pinch myself and say, 'Did that happen?' But Lucy, my dear, it most certainly did. So it pleases me greatly to share my rather idiosyncratic story with you, and I assure you that no one else has had that privilege. Let me start at the very beginning, shall I, to put you in the picture more clearly. Connor, as you know, has 2 boys who have become my stepsons. Well, that's what happened when I got married to him, of course.
Cameron is the same age as you are, Lucy. He has a younger brother, 2 years his junior, called Hamish. Cameron adores science and math. He's one of these very clever boys that deals with facts all the time. As far as he's concerned, if you can't see it, then it can't possibly be real. Hamish, on the other hand, is much more thoughtful and introspective in every regard. The two of them are looking forward to meeting you one day, because a proud mother like myself talks about her daughter incessantly. So let's just say they know all about you, every single little detail. So much so, in fact, that I'm sure I'm beginning to sound rather like a broken record, but I just can't help myself. After Connor and I got married, we bought a stunning old red-bricked farmhouse in the countryside that looks astonishingly English in every regard, like something you might have plucked out of the Derbyshire countryside and ferried all the way to America. I think it's because the original architect of the house was a man called Stuart Hemingway. He designed a few of the red-bricked houses in these parts, and was originally from British waters. I have told you a lot about the farmhouse in my previous letters that I hope you have read. Me and Connor are very partial to life here in the countryside. We wanted to live in a place surrounded by prepossessing beautiful views where we could enjoy plenty of fresh air and exercise. Connor realized he could work from home most days of the week and commute to Atlanta twice a month. So it seemed like a great idea to lay down roots in the countryside. At the time we moved here, the kids had only just come back from England, after having lived there for a couple of years. So returning to America, we decided to lay down roots here in Georgia. Connor, much like myself, is passionate about horse riding. So we bought a property with a stable block, ponds, grazing fields, and ubiquitous trees absolutely everywhere. It is stunningly beautiful, Lucy. You have no idea. I just wish you were here to see it all. I'm very proud to tell you, Lucy dear, that Connor and I are the owners of 6 American quarter horses. I ride a horse called Buttercup every day, all over the countryside. She's got such a delightful temperament. When I bought the horse, her name was 8. Can you believe that? I was astonished that anyone would call their horse a number. So I changed it at once, and as crazy as it sounds, I think Buttercup appreciates it. I have to tell you, Lucy, that it is particularly beautiful out here. But I'm still trying to get my head over how large and vast America is. I gather all the British people, when they come to America, feel much the same way as I do. I guess in England we're just used to things being a lot more contained and smaller, so to speak. It must have been a couple of weeks ago when I was left with the boys at home, as Connor decided to stay overnight in Atlanta for a 2-day business conference. I decided to make a pizza evening of it. Both Cameron and Hamish were arguing about what we should watch on television. Cameron wanted to watch a wildlife documentary by Richard Attenborough on the Serengeti in Africa, while Hamish wanted to watch his all-time favourite programme called Finding Bigfoot. I doubt they have such a programme in England, but out here in America it's been very popular to those who are interested in the subject of this cryptid creature, but also highly controversial. As you can imagine, people have argued relentlessly about the possibility of this cryptid-like creature living here in America. The kids began to argue.
I want to watch Finding Bigfoot, Hamish told his brother assertively. I let you watch your wildlife programme last night. Now it's my turn to choose what we watch. It's only fair.
Cameron snorted.
My wildlife documentary is real stuff, not a bunch of bogus baloney. Why don't you want to watch something decent?
Now, kids, would you please calm down? We're here to enjoy an evening watching television together, I said obsequiously. I don't want any arguing. I could sense the tense energy in the air, and was doing my level best to calm the both of them down. You heard your brother, Cameron. Hamish was patient enough to watch your wildlife documentary last night.
So tonight we're going to watch Hamish's favourite programme. It's only fair. You need to extend your brother the very same courtesy he extended towards you. It's called being chivalrous. Well, I think it's stupid, said Cameron, taking a bite of his pizza, but resigning himself to the fact that whether he liked it or not, we would be watching Finding Bigfoot together. I said nothing. I sat down on the couch and watched the programme with the two boys. I didn't know what to make of it, Lucy dear. I'd heard of Bigfoot before, but had never really given the creature a passing thought. I guess that I thought that this cryptid creature was part of Pulp Fiction. But as I listened to this programme, people were claiming to have seen sightings of these so-called hairy men all over America. Many of these witnesses didn't appear to be making up fictitious stories for attention. But I persuaded myself that they might have thought they'd seen a Bigfoot, but it may well have been something else. I certainly noticed that there was a woman on the programme called Renee, who seemed very, very sceptical about people's accounts. I'd lived in England all my life, as you know, Lucy, so the subject of Bigfoot and other mythical creatures was not spoken of terribly much, although, of course, the Loch Ness Monster is the exception in Scotland, and that was talked about more than a handful of times by members of my own family when I was growing up. Lucy, dear, I wonder if you remember Miranda Lockisher. Now, she's a good friend of your father's, and I'm sure probably still is. When I was still married to your father, she became a good friend of mine as well. I'm sure you know that Miranda was from Scotland. When she was a little girl, she physically witnessed a monster with a long dinosaur-like neck in Loch Ness, and was there one moment and gone the next. She never forgot the experience. She was an 8-year-old girl at the time, staring out on the loch, unable to believe what she was seeing with her naked eyes out there in the water. I knew I was seeing the monster, she told me and your father, when we invited her over to dinner one night. I hurried to call my father because I was so excited, as growing up the subject of Loch Ness was discussed quite frequently, and my father knew of 2 people who claimed to have seen the monster who were credible witnesses. I told him, "Dad, I've seen the monster, come with me." I dragged him by the hand and ran towards the lake with my dad, pointing out towards the water. "Over there," I said to him, "over there." And when he looked out at the water, nothing was there. But the water had definitely been disturbed, and there were huge ripples in the water that suggested that something big had been there. My father looked at me and said, "Miranda, it's not good to make up stories for attention like this." I burst into tears and said, "Daddy, but I saw it, I'm not lying to you, I promise you it was there." But he refused to believe me. I even drew a picture for him to show him exactly what I'd seen, and he told me that I knew about the legend and was making up stories to perpetrate the myth. I was so incredibly frustrated. I had seen something out there on the water so profound that I wanted to share with my father, but he wouldn't believe me, and that really, really hurt. I'd never lied to my father over anything, yet he was willing to believe I was lying to him now. I knew if my dad didn't believe me, it was even more likely that no one else ever would. So like so many other witnesses, I kept stum. I knew when Miranda told me her story that she was absolutely telling me the truth, Lucy dear. She told me she believed that the Loch Ness Monster was an interdimensional beast which drifted in and out of our reality. So there I was, sitting in front of the television set, listening to these witnesses expressing their frustration of having seen a Bigfoot, but no one believing their account. And I was rather reminded about Miranda and her extraordinary encounter with the Loch Ness Monster. Cameron was being very unkind towards his brother Hamish, telling him all the time he couldn't believe that he was believing the nonsense that was being spilled out. So I was immediately defensive towards Hamish and said to Cameron, "Well, how do you know Bigfoot doesn't exist, Cameron?" "Because I know they don't," said Cameron. "There's no way. I'm sorry. There's no way. There'd be more evidence, don't you think?" "Why is there no way, Cameron?" I challenged him. "America is a huge country. Who Who is to say that these things aren't out there? Much of this country is uncharted and unexplored by man, so you cannot presume to say you know everything. When you don't, that is arrogantly presumptuous of you. Besides, how do you know that Bigfoot is not interdimensional?
What the hell is that supposed to mean?
Asked Cameron. It means that how do you know that Bigfoot cannot leave this dimension and drift into another?
Now you've lost me, said Cameron. You're speaking a whole lot of woo-woo. Are you telling me that you're buying all this Bigfoot stuff? You're an adult. You should be more cynical than I am. I'm only a kid.
All I'm saying, Cameron, I told him, is it's very ignorant to assume you know everything. And it's also wrong to discredit all these witnesses who claim to have seen something. Do you have any idea how brave it was for them to step forward and acknowledge they saw something, at the risk of being ridiculed? If you saw a Bigfoot, would you tell anyone about it? Think about it for a moment. How would your testimony be received? Cameron did think about it, and then said tentatively,
Well, if they're real, and I saw one, I guess I would definitely not tell anybody about it. I wouldn't be so stupid. People would think I was off my trolley.
There you go. Don't be so quick to judge someone who claims to have seen a Bigfoot. Think about how much courage it took on their parts to step forward and reveal their account. I proceeded to tell both Cameron and Hamish about Miranda's experience in Loch Ness, when she swore that she saw the Loch Ness monster, but her father refused to believe her.
I feel sorry for her, Cameron admitted. I mean, she's convinced she saw the monster, but her dad refuses to believe it. I'm sorry, but that really, really sucks. If my dad didn't believe something I told him, it would really upset me. Other people might dismiss my account, but if my dad won't believe me, then that's not cool.
Of course it's not cool, I agreed. It's horrible to step out of your comfort zone and to share something bizarre, and nobody believes you.
Do you believe the Scottish friend of yours actually saw the Loch Ness monster? Hamish asked me eagerly.
Well, I believe she saw something, I told him gingerly. I had known Miranda Locketshire for many years, when married to my ex-husband, so she didn't make things up. But whether she saw the Loch Ness monster or not, I don't know. But she definitely saw something in that water. Several days passed after that rather controversial television dinner with my stepsons, which turned out to be a rather pleasant evening. And at the end of our debates, even Cameron had reflectively said to me,
You know what? I'm open to admit that there are more things on heaven and earth than meet the eye, and I've got to admit this interdimensional theory of your friends could explain a whole lot.
I have to admit, Lucy, dear, for the rigidly stiff Cameron to admit this to me was a breakthrough of note. And after that he never argued with his brother about watching programs on television like Finding Bigfoot again. It was like his mind had opened up exponentially, and maybe he became more interested in the things that you cannot explain. One evening, days after having enjoyed a pizza evening with my stepson, I was driving back home, after having gone to see a local hypnotherapist who had agreed to see me on a late appointment, after which she invited me to join her family for dinner, as for some reason we just hit it off. I had no idea I'd end up driving home so late. I'd never been to a hypnotherapist before, Lucy, but a friend of mine encouraged me to book an appointment with her.
You need to go and see her, she persuaded me. I can see you're taking far too many painkillers for your backaches. That's not good. These things can get out of control if you don't nip them in the bud fast. I promise you, you need to see her. She's brilliant at helping people break addictive behaviours.
I knew I was popping painkillers like candy. Even my own doctor was refusing to prescribe any more meds to me, complaining that it was becoming a problem. Unfortunately, a recent fall off Buttercup had been giving me uncomfortable, painful spasms in my back. My doctor wanted me to use natural therapies to address the pain, and was actively encouraging me to go and see a chiropractor. I I just wanted more pills to pop, which I knew was becoming a problem that needed addressing. Connor was not remotely happy about how many pills I was consuming, so he also encouraged me to go and see this woman. So I visited her because she had glowing reviews. My friend had been a heavy smoker. She gave up a lifetime habit after 2 hypnotherapy sessions with this woman, so she had to be good. So I thought, why not? I'd give it a go. I mean, what harm could it possibly do? It turned out that going to her was the very best decision I've ever made. As I kid you not, Lucy, a day after that session, I never touched a pain pill again, and that in itself is a miracle. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I had never intended to stay out so late that evening. I'd never driven late at night before on a sequestered country road. The dinner went on for far too long. I guess I just got carried away, as you do, in the heat of gregarious conversation. You know what they say, Lucy dear. Time goes by fast when you're having fun. I thoroughly enjoyed a great evening with these lovely, lovely people. Besides, Connor had told me to thoroughly enjoy myself, to let my hair down, and to come back home as late as I liked. He was encouraging me to make new friends, as we still didn't know that many people in these parts. I want to tell you, driving down long abandoned roads at night, without any street lights on, surrounded by tall, lofty woodgroves of trees, is not for the faint-hearted. I was more than a little intimidated. It was eerily spooky on the roads, and trees that looked benign during the daylight hours took on a menacing, almost monstrous appearance, their arms almost becoming like gnarled arms. There was practically no moon that night, thanks to a dense cloud cover, and if there were any stars in the dark sky, I failed to see any of them. I was really beginning to regret not accepting my host's invitation to stay overnight. She had warned me that driving down some of those lonely roads could be hellishly scary, but I persuaded myself that I could do it, and thanked her all the same for her kindness. I had thankfully only had 1 glass of wine, which was enough to calm down my nerves, but still to be a responsible driver. I had half a mind to call Connor to pick me up, as I was becoming nervous driving down long ribbons of roads swaddled by grim, silent darkness on every side. After some encouraging self-talk, I artfully persuaded myself that it was no big deal. At this point, my car had come to a grinding halt. My heart was pounding violently in my chest, and my whole body began to shake involuntarily, as I stared at this thing in abject horror. I kid you not, I was staring at a Bigfoot, when only a week before, Cameron and Hamish had been discussing this mythical beast with me, and now there it was, standing in the middle of the road before me, larger than life. You might say there are no such thing as coincidences, Lucy dear. I couldn't help wondering if the universe was waving a defiant hand at me and saying, "To all the doubters out there, put this in your pipe and smoke it." The Bigfoot just stood there. He wasn't moving an inch, just standing there, staring at me, through his dark eyes that gave off a yellow eyeshine. All I could think is this really real? I knew earlier on in the evening I'd enjoyed a hypnotherapy session. I naturally wondered, could I be making this creature up in my head? Was it a side effect of the hypnotherapy to hallucinate like this? Maybe I was hallucinating, because I had discussed the creature only a week before, so it was rather fresh in my mind. My car was squatting in a still position, only a few feet away from where the Bigfoot was standing. It was so surreal, Lucy. I kept thinking to myself, no, this is not happening. It just can't be happening. It can't be. But I knew, even as I stared at this creature, that it absolutely was happening, and this thing was real. Denial is a very powerful thing when you try to make sense of what you're seeing. Let me tell you, Lucy, nothing in this world prepares you for an encounter with such a Herculean-sized creature. A creature so powerful that one smack of his hand and you're pretty much dead. So let's just say it threw me right out of my comfort zone. I tried to acclimatize to what I was seeing. But how do you do that? It's almost impossible. I think I was so astonished that I wasn't even afraid, for my fear response had been immobilized by my complete astonishment, I suspect. The Bigfoot at a guess was about 9 foot tall, possibly 800 pounds, maybe less, maybe more, covered in long flowing hair that was very dark. I noticed the head was a pyramid shape, his neck terribly short, so short in fact it was barely even discernible. The creature's face was remarkably human. I was so astounded by this. Since then I've gone online to look at other Bigfoot pictures, but the one I saw was much more human than the ones I've seen online. He had hooded eyes and very high cheekbones. One thing I noticed was that the long hair on his torso had been plaited into the tiniest braids that you have ever seen, hundreds and hundreds of them. So I could see his torso very, very clearly. It was so chiseled. I'm in no doubt that he had an enviable six-pack. In that moment the Bigfoot locked eyes with me, and I heard him say in my head, "Of course I'm real." He then turned around and glided away. It was only then that I looked at the clock on my dashboard. Before I'd seen the Bigfoot, it was 12:32. But after I left that road, it was 2:32. Now how do you explain that, Lucy? I've heard of missing time in alien abductions, but not with a Bigfoot before. I could not account for 2 hours of missing time. I don't honestly know how to explain that to you, Lucy. But to say I was discombobulated is an understatement of note. When I returned to the farmhouse, Connor was not remotely amused with me. He was waiting downstairs for me, looking like a crotchety, bad-tempered old man. I had sent him a message that I was on my way, but I rocked up at the house 2 hours late. So I guess understandably he was out of his mind with worry. "Where the hell did you get to?" he asked me. "I was worried sick about you." I decided not to tell him my incredulous story. You see, Lucy, I was beginning to doubt that it had even happened, even though it was so vividly clear in my mind. I knew if I couldn't believe my own story, how much less believable would it be for Connor to believe? To all intents and purposes, Connor is a lot like his son Cameron. Both of them have more in common than just the letter C in front of their names. Connor is a very matter-of-fact guy. He has to see something to believe it, you see, Lucy. I told him the Loch Ness Monster story once, and he was convinced my friend just made it up for attention, and I know she did not. "Why are you late?" he badgered me. "I was so worried about you. You told me in your message you'd be back 2 hours ago. I had no idea whether I should drive out there looking for you or call the police." I regret to tell you, Lucy, I lied to Connor, and I've never lied to him before. I couldn't tell him the truth, only because the truth was so far-fetched. Imagine it for a moment if I said to him, "Sorry I'm late, Connor. I stumbled into a Bigfoot in the road who told me he was real, and by the way, I cannot account for 2 hours of missing time." How do you ever explain that to someone? It sounds utterly ridiculous, and I didn't want Connor to doubt my integrity. So lying was the safer option for me. "I'm so sorry. I was just so tired I drew over to the side of the road because I knew I was falling asleep at the wheel. I was going to text you, but then I fell asleep." That's what I told him, Lucy. Connor was no longer mad at me. Instead he said, "I'm proud of you for listening to your body. I really am. When you're sleepy, you absolutely have to pull over to the side of the road. You did the right thing. I'm so sorry I was so angry, but I was worried sick. You should have accepted that woman's offer to stay overnight. I should have insisted you did." As you can imagine, for days after my encounter with that Bigfoot, I reviewed what had really happened on that road over and over again. But do you know, Lucy, when something outlandish happens to you, the first thing your mind does is make you doubt what happened. And that was what I was beginning to experience. until something rather odd happened that made me re-examine my experience. It all began days later, Lucy dear. It was during the summer holidays when both Connor and Hamish were going out on their ATVs in the woodgrove on our property. They had promised me that they'd be back for lunch. Connor was getting incredibly angry with them. He said they were being disrespectful to me, as I'd prepared them a delicious lunch. They had promised they'd be back in time, and had failed to arrive for lunch, which was most uncharacteristic for them. I told Connor not to be hard on the boys. It was the holidays after all, and kids get carried away, don't they? Sometimes they lose track of time. "You're too nice to the boys," he said to me. "They know they were supposed to be back for lunch, and then they both failed to show up. You prepared them a delicious meal, and they do this. I'm sorry, Fee. I don't know what to say." "Don't apologize, Connor. The boys are delightful. I'm not at all put out with them not showing up for lunch. They're boys, for goodness sake. It's the school holidays. Are they not allowed to let their hair down once in a while?" We were not worried about the boys. This was not the first time they arrived back at the farmhouse late. We knew they were predisposed to getting distracted, so naturally I made allowances for them, as you do. I hasten to say they both rocked up at the farmhouse at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, apologizing profusely for being so late, and looking rather sheepish. They both claimed to have got off their ATVs, gone to sit by the stream in the woods, and fallen fast asleep. And when they both woke up, they discovered their hair was full of tiny braids. They were exactly the same kind of braids, Lucy dear, that I'd seen on the Bigfoot on that night. Both of the boys had no comprehension as to who had played with their hair like this. "You fell asleep by the stream. Is that the best you can do?" Connor snapped at them. "I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life. You're sitting by the stream, are you? And then you fall asleep just like that, subsequently failing to come back to the farmhouse in time for lunch. You were away for hours. What on earth is wrong with you boys?" I could see that Connor was absolutely furious with the both of them. He wasn't buying into their feeble, seemingly spurious excuses one bit. And the story about them waking up with braids in their hair made him all the more mad. I guess he thought his children were spinning a wild, over-the-top yarn, and had probably messed around braiding their own hair, although he didn't stop to actually consider why they would do such an enigmatic thing. "Do you know how long Fee here has been slaving away at the stove for you, to make you a decent lunch, and you both never bothered to show up? I raised you boys to be better than that, and to have manners, but what happened to them?" "I'm sorry, Dad, but we're telling you the truth. We were sitting by the stream. We woke up, and there were braids in our hair. We aren't making any of this up. You have to believe us. Please believe us, Dad." "I don't need to listen to this. What do you take me for? A complete mug?" said Connor. "We both know that you braided your own hair, boys. If you're going to lie to me, you're going to have to do a hell of a lot better than your poxy, far-fetched, fanciful stories that carry no weight at all. I can hardly bear to look at the both of you when you spout such nonsense at me. I would have hoped that you would have both had the decency to own up to your rudeness, instead of coming up with these outrageous excuses to explain your atrocious behaviour. Is it so hard to tell us the truth? What is wrong with the both of you? The least you can do is to admit you got carried away with the time. Is that so hard to do?" "But Dad, you don't understand. We didn't make this up. We did fall asleep by the stream," said Hamish insistently. I noticed that Cameron gave him a sharp nudge with the back of his elbow to shut his brother up. He interjected on behalf of his brother and said, "Sorry, Dad. You're absolutely right. Me and Hamish, well, we got carried away with the time. And as for the braiding, we braided our own hair. We made the whole thing up. I guess we felt really bad for letting you down, that's all." "Well, that's better," said Connor. "Finally you're prepared to own up to your insouciant behaviour. But it's not me I want you to apologise to. It's Fee. You put her out. She was the one that prepared the lunch. So I want you to apologise to her."
"We're really sorry, Fee."
"Oh, for goodness sake, don't apologise to me. I wasn't put out in the slightest. It really isn't a problem," I said to the boys. "I understand it's the school holidays, and it's so easy for you to get carried away and to lose all track of time. It happens to the best of us. Don't you dare worry. I wasn't slaving away at all. I was just making tortilla wraps for lunch, so it's no biggie that you missed it. You're too nice to the boys. They don't deserve you, Fee," said Connor. It was after dinner that Cameron surreptitiously came up to me. He tapped me on the back, Lucy dear, and you know what he said? He said,
"Fee, I think that Bigfoot might actually be real."
"Why do you say that, Cameron?" I asked him. "This is a turn-up for the books for you." But he suddenly looked as if he thought he'd said far too much, and completely shut down on me, Lucy. I want to tell you, dear, that something happened to Connor's boys in that wood grove, but they're not talking any more. But I think they had an encounter with a Bigfoot. So my own story that I was beginning to doubt, I unequivocally now believe was real. Of course, I haven't shared any of this with Connor, as he would think it was all completely absurd. But I assure you, none of this is made up. When Paul read my mother's letter, I was completely confounded. "Bigfoot," I said. "Are those things even real? We never talk about such creatures here in England." "Well," said Paul, "from your mother's letter it would seem that they are. I mean, she didn't make up what she saw on the road that night. It's quite some story, don't you think, Lucy?" "Well, it sure is. But you must remember she'd been hypnotised, so her mind could have been all over the place, couldn't it?" "Not really. It's not the same thing," said Paul. "She had hypnotherapy to reduce her desire to take pain meds. She was in her right mind when she had that encounter. But it was so insanely bizarre, Lucy. So she's second-guessing herself, isn't she? Doubting what she saw. But I guess that's what happens. Imagine for a moment, Lucy, you wake up in the middle of the night. You hear a strange noise. You trot over to the window to investigate. And there in your yard you see two green men standing outside a large spacecraft. They tell you they're real. The next minute you know in the blink of an eye that they're gone. Would you doubt what you'd actually seen?" "Of course I'd doubt it," I admitted. "I would think it had to be part of a dream." "Why would you think that?" Paul challenged me. "I guess because it's so outlandishly weird. Because it's the last thing I'm expecting to see in my yard." "Exactly right. That's the whole point," said Paul. "If you leaned out of the window and you see your cat on the footpath outside, you would know what you were seeing was real. You wouldn't doubt it for a moment. You would accept that your cat was part of your reality. But a spacecraft and two green men are so paradoxical, you're bound to persuade yourself it never happened." "You're right," I agreed. "That does make perfect sense." "Then, of course, your mother noticed the Bigfoot had tiny braids in front of his torso. Remember that? That's a detail you'd never ever see in a dream. So how do you explain that, Lucy? And then both her two stepsons returned to the farmhouse with braids in their hair, like the ones she saw on the Bigfoot in the road. So that's rather bizarre too. She couldn't explain 2 hours of missing time, could she? And in the same breath your stepbrothers cannot explain how they were asleep for so long. You've got to admit it's rather bizarre, and there's definitely a connection here somewhere along the line." "It is strange," I agreed. When I left for the airport in the late afternoon, instead of being reluctant to go to America, my mother's incredulous story invited within my spirit an unbridled enthusiasm about the adventure that lay ahead of me, like an unexplored treasure map. I privately wondered if I would encounter a Bigfoot myself, and hoped that I would. Not that I would expect anyone to believe me if I did, but I didn't really care about credibility, as an experience with a Bigfoot would be nice. When Paul read me the letter, I felt a lot better about going to the States. My mind was fleetingly distracted from my hatred towards my mother, which I suppose was a promising start. It had, of course, been incredibly hard to say goodbye to my beloved father and to Paul, my very best friend, who were both at the airport to see me off, and by the sorrowful, lugubrious expressions on their faces, I might as well be going to another universe. "You will be good," my father said, with glassy eyes. "Don't be so hard on your mother. Remember, she loves you." I resisted a scoff. I hugged my father so hard. I didn't want to let him go. My father was my entire world, and in my eyes he could do absolutely no wrong. Paul gave me a friendly hug and whispered in my ear, "You better meet that Bigfoot. I want to know all the details. I want to hear all about it." I grinned at him and gave him a thumbs up. And then, with tears spilling down my cheeks, I let them watch me drift away from them, like an autumn leaf being blown away on the pavement. I left them, feeling a lump in my throat and a heaviness in my heart. I'm glad to say the flight to the States was not too uncomfortable. But then again, whenever is a flight comfortable, unless you're fortunate enough to be sitting in first class, which I wasn't. But at least I had a window seat, and was sitting next to a small couple who were constantly getting up to stretch their legs, which meant I didn't have to keep asking them to move, which was a huge relief. It was when we arrived at Atlanta's main airport that I was filled with a nervous trepidation. For a brief moment, I didn't even want to leave the plane. I was filled with an all-consuming dread about being reunited with my mother again, after 4 long years. My chest felt as if it was filled with a colony of butterflies that were all flapping their wings at once. I was told that Connor Dumbarton would be meeting me in the airport arrivals hall, which was a relief. At least it postponed the agony of getting up too close and personal with my mother. I was not sure what Connor looked like, but I spotted him at once, as he towered over and above everyone else in arrivals, and he was holding up a sign that was hard to miss. He was an attractive-looking man for a man of his years, and when he saw me his face broke out into a huge friendly grin. I was determined not to be overly friendly towards him, but he didn't appear to be at all put off by my aloofness. "It's good to see you, Lucy," he said, giving me a big friendly hug. "Welcome to America. It's your first time here, is it not?" I nodded. "How was your flight?" he asked me. "I hope it wasn't too uncomfortable for you. It can be very claustrophobic in those aeroplanes." "It was all right," I said, not wishing to expand too much in conversation with this man. Before long, I was sitting comfortably on the passenger side seat in his large SUV, as Connor drove me to the family farmhouse, which seemed like quite a long way away in the countryside. "I thought it was best, Lucy, that I picked you up in person. I know you've been very angry with your mother for a very long time, and I understand how you feel. But I want to promise you this. She never willfully intended to hurt you." I could feel the bile rising up in the back of my throat. "My mother was a married woman. You had an affair with her, and then you took her away from us back to America with you. How do you think that feels?" I said indignantly. "I cannot imagine what it feels like, Lucy. It must have been brutal for you, and of course for your father. I wish me and your mother had done things differently, but there was no way that we were going to avoid the inevitable hurt that we would ultimately cause. Your mother wasn't happy in her marriage with your father, and I'm sure she's told you that. But she still loves him very much. But they just didn't have much in common." "So you thought you'd steal her away from my dad, did you? That's so rich." "It wasn't like that, Lucy. Me and your mother started off as friends, but we had so much in common. One thing led to another, and we fell in love. We could not imagine our lives apart from each other." "Stop making excuses! I hate it when adults make excuses like you're doing." "I'm not making excuses, Lucy. said Connor gingerly. His hands were on the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were exposing their white bones. Lucy, I do not know what to say to you, or how to make anything right again. But I do know this. Your mother loves you very much, and she is hoping that this trip will help you resolve your differences with her. Please be kind to her, Lucy. She never meant to hurt you. I think we can agree to disagree on that. My mother did intend to hurt me, and I can't be persuaded otherwise. I wish I didn't come to America. I didn't want to come here, but my dad made me feel I had to come. I hope you're going to enjoy yourself with us, Lucy. I really do, because you are so welcome here. And I know for a fact that my sons are looking forward to meeting you. I'm not sure what else Connor was spitting out at me. I realized he was trying to soften me up before I actually saw my mother again. But I had no intention of being warm towards her. I hated her with a burning passion. I needed her to know how much she had hurt me. When I arrived at the red-bricked farmhouse, my mother ran out of the house with 2 boys running after her. The 3 of them had bright, excited smiles on their faces, as if seeing me was the most wonderful thing in the world. It was hard not to cry to receive such a warm welcome. It was emotionally so moving, and made me feel so incredibly loved. My mother, without reservation or doubt, threw her arms tenderly around me and just cried. In that moment my hatred and bitterness towards her dissipated. I wanted to hate her for what she'd done to me, but I couldn't any more, because once I was in her arms, my heart melted, and all I felt towards her was love. And that was when I realized I needed to let it all go, to let the hate go that I'd been harvesting over the years towards my mother, because it was not serving me. Oh, Lucy, dear! Oh, I can't believe it's you! I've missed you so much. You have no idea. I can't believe this is happening, and that you're actually here with us now. It is so wonderful to see you, my love, she told me through glistening tears. And all I can say, my darling, for all the dreadful hurt I've caused you, I'm so, so sorry. I do remember we sobbed and sobbed in each other's arms, and it felt as if the heaviness between us had finally lifted, as if the huge iceberg that the Titanic had faced on that grueling, inauspicious day had finally been shifted. These are your 2 step-brothers, my mother said to me proudly. This is Cameron, she said, pointing to the taller of the 2 boys, who was smiling at me warmly. This is Hamish. Both the boys were rather shy and bashful, but shook my hand politely and said, Hello, Lucy. It's good to meet you. We've heard a lot about you. Welcome to America. Within days I'd settled into the farmhouse and was made to feel so incredibly welcome by the whole Dumbarton family. I'm glad to say my mother took me to one side after I had rested a while from the flight. We had a long talk together, where she explained to me why she'd left my father. It was not easy to listen to what she had to say, but I knew I needed to hear her out and to try to see things from her perspective, which was incredibly hard. I'm afraid, Lucy, dear, she had said to me, I was so young when I met your father all those years ago. He was quite the charmer back in his day, you know. I fell for him hard. We were both besotted by each other, but at the same time we were very young and callow, you know. Within 5 months of dating, your father had proposed to me, and I didn't hesitate for a moment to say yes. My parents weren't remotely happy with my getting married so quickly. They both felt that me and your father should get to know each other a lot better before we made such a decision. My own father took me to one side and said, "Fee, you've always been very impulsive, but as your father, it would be remiss of me not to warn you that sometimes when we do things in haste, we repent at leisure. You barely know this young man of yours. Why don't you date him for a while? And then, if you want to get married another year down the line or so, all well and good, you will have my blessing." I didn't listen to my father's judicious advice, because I thought I knew better. I was naive, extremely willful, very, very stubborn. I believed I wanted to be with your father forever. I was so in love with him. He was a good-looking boy, and I thought he was all that. Let's just say after I married him, the cracks began to show in our relationship. When I realized that me and your father did not exactly have very much in common. And believe it or not, Lucy, that is a big deal. I told my father about my feelings concerning my marriage to your father, that I believed I'd made a catastrophic mistake in marrying him, and he suggested that I got divorced. I told your father I thought we should call it quits on our marriage at the time, and he even admitted that we were probably not right for each other. But then, lo and behold, I suddenly discovered I was pregnant with you. And that was when I realized that I needed to make the relationship with your father work. We had a child on the way, which changed everything. Believe me, we both tried to make the marriage work. I wasn't at all happy. And when I met Connor Dumbarton at the riding stables, we became remarkably good friends. Connor was coming to the stables to ride one of the horses there, after working hours in the city, and that was how we met. We had so much in common, and that was when I realized I wanted to be with him. I kept putting off telling your father what was going on between Connor and myself, until I could put it off no longer. And yes, I regret so many of the choices I made, but I have no regrets moving to America and marrying Connor. It was the right decision to make, but I always regretted the hurt I ultimately caused the both of you. I want you to know, Lucy, I never regretted having you, nor did I blame you for wishing to stay with your father. I respected your decision to stay with him, because I still love him, you know. I always will. You cannot stop loving someone when you've been married to them for so long. Your dad is a very good person, Lucy, and he will always have an incredibly special place in my heart. And he feels exactly the same way about me. We will always remain the very best of friends, you know. It was after my conversation with my mother that I decided to let my hatred towards her go, as the only person that I was hurting was myself. It was like I was carrying a coal in my hand that was burning only me, and the only way I would stop burning myself is letting go of the coal. I began to fully appreciate why my mother made the choices she did, and I could see why she was so much more suited to Connor Dumbarton than she'd ever been to my father. I knew she was right. People make mistakes in their lives, don't they? Sometimes the mistakes we make along the way, and the poor choices, can hurt the people we love the most. But without mistakes, we would be unlikely to learn very much. I began to realize that I was beginning to enjoy my stay in America, and before long both Cameron and Hamish had taken me all over Georgia to show me all the sights, and I was having a wonderful time. The Dumbarton family had an enviable lifestyle. That was true. There was no doubt in my mind that my mother had been right in her letter to me, that America was indeed an incredibly large country. The wide open spaces really threw me. When I asked my mother about her Bigfoot encounter that she had written about in her letter to me, that Paul had read to me, she confirmed to me that I was the only one who knew her secret, which made me feel rather special. It's not that I don't want to share my Bigfoot encounter with Connor, but he is a very sceptical man, and I don't know whether he'd actually buy my story. But some things can be difficult to share, even with those we love, Lucy, because they're profoundly personal. Do you understand that? I think I do, I said. Do you think that Cameron and Hamish had a Bigfoot encounter of their own? I asked her. I mean, they came back from the Woodgrove one day, late in the afternoon, having missed lunch. They both had braided hair. In your letter you mentioned the tiny braids that you'd seen on the Bigfoot's torso, the one that you met on the sequestered country road in the middle of the night, after you'd been driving for a while, after having enjoyed dinner with the hypnotherapist's family. Do you think the Bigfoot you saw might have braided Connor and Hamish's hair as well? without them even knowing about it, because they claimed to have fallen fast asleep, which was why they never turned up for lunch, if you remember. I think something did happen, my mother admitted to me, but I'm afraid my stepsons have not been very forthcoming about anything. But I do know that Cameron said to me that he believed that Bigfoot was real, and then he shut down after that. But for him to say that was incredibly revelatory as far as I'm concerned. Do you think I might see a Bigfoot while I'm here? I asked my mother, already knowing what she was likely to tell me. Ostensibly, I couldn't help myself. Since I'd arrived in America and had learnt about my mother's story, I was so inquisitive about the subject of Bigfoot. I never imagined I'd be so piqued in such a subject, because I'd believed that Bigfoot was a legendary creature before. But now I knew differently. I had done a ton of research at night on the subject, while sitting up in bed in my bedroom in the Dumbarton household, and I discovered that people had all manner of encounters with Bigfoot-like creatures, from fleeting sightings to moving experiences to downright terrifying encounters. And I discerned that, like human beings, Bigfoots are as individualistic as we are. But the likelihood of my meeting one was very remote. But I could still live in hope, couldn't I? I hate to blow your bubble, Lucy, dear, my mother had said, but it's incredibly unlikely you will encounter a Bigfoot while you're here. I'm not saying it's impossible, of course. Stranger things have happened. But I would say don't get your hopes up, my dear. In my experience, when you're looking for something, you never find it. And it's when you're carrying on with your life, nonchalantly as you do, when surprises invariably happen. I assure you, Lucy, when I was travelling down that country road, the last thing I expected to see was a Bigfoot. It was so profoundly bizarre that it's taken me a long time to actually accept that I saw it. Sometimes I still struggle with that, but I know it was real. I knew my mother was right. In my own life, when something of mine went missing, I'd search for it everywhere, sometimes never finding it. Lo and behold, it would usually only turn up when I was no longer looking for it anymore, and probably no longer needed it. I'd also found waiting for things always took so long, like a parcel in the post that took forever to arrive. In truth, that was the story of my life. I was resolutely determined that in one way or another I was going to get Cameron and Hamish to talk to me about what had transpired to them on that day that they arrived back at the farmhouse with braided hair, after having unexplainably fallen fast asleep by a stream of water in the woodgrove, and were seemingly indisposed for about 3 hours. Their hair had been mysteriously braided during that time. I knew even if they wouldn't talk to my mother, and to their father, I was quite sure that I could persuade them to talk to me. I was going to get Cameron and Hamish to dish up the dirt about what had obviously transpired on that day when they arrived back at the farmhouse incredibly late, with no explanation for why this was the case. They claimed to have fallen asleep by a stream of water in the grove, and were indisposed for a significant length of time, and in that time they had had their hair mysteriously braided. I knew even if they wouldn't talk to my mother or their own father about the incident, I could easily persuade them to talk to me. We were getting on famously well together, given we were of similar ages, especially when my 2 step-brothers were beginning to call me Sis. That was the best thing they could have ever done for me, as I really wanted to have siblings of my own, and now I had 2 brothers that had adopted me as their sister. To all intents and purposes, Cameron and Hamish were very much alike, like 2 peas in a pod, you could say, with curly blonde locks that cheekily frolicked around their cute heart-shaped faces. They had beautiful greenish eyes, and were both reasonably tall and rather lanky like their father. I found that Cameron was much more outgoing and extrovert than his younger brother Hamish, who was more reserved, but he was a deeply thoughtful boy. I do remember when both my stepbrothers shared their incredulous story with me. Never did I expect in a million months of Sundays to be quite so blown away, but believe me, I was. I had known all along I would manage to prize it out of them somehow, with a little artful persuasion on my part. It was a scorchingly hot summer's afternoon, when Atlanta had been hit with an unforgiving, formidable heat wave, which had barreled across the globe unabashedly, and countries like England and France were also victim to its unfortunate ferocity of searing temperatures that left people dreaming of colder climates, where people were enjoying significantly cooler weather. There were accounts of people dying all around the world, where the temperatures were so fierce and relentlessly unforgiving. I do remember on this particular day, it was ferociously hot out of doors, that the idea of going outside was possibly as attractive as putting your head in an oven. The horses were suffering in the meadows with a thriving fly population buzzing obtrusively around their eyes. So my mother had covered their heads with netting designed purposely for horses to keep the flies at bay, and had successfully installed fly traps all over the place to catch the nasty little buggers. If you looked out of the kitchen window, the searing sunlight was so bright, and the once green grass had become significantly drier, almost as if it had been bleached and scorched by the sun from a cold winter, but this was from an insufferable blistering heat. It really was that bad. Everything was looking tired and strained. If you wanted to be out of doors, the only way to gain light relief was to walk among the grove of trees, in order to receive the pleasure of their glorious all-encompassing shade. Me and my two stepbrothers were eager to embrace the great outdoors. We naturally gravitated towards the shaded areas on the property, as you do, almost as if the tall, lofty trees that welcomed us had now become our new best friends. In a trice the day moved steadily forwards, as we merrily rode on the back of our ATVs, down the undulating paths of the woodgrove, sprinkled with leaves and fallen twigs. We laughed happily among ourselves, glad to leave the blaring light of a very unpleasantly hot day behind us, to welcome the idyllic, lush, subterranean oasis that was now dappled in an ethereal light. I think all three of us felt rejuvenated and recharged among the congregation of stately trees, with their proud, lofty deportments, and large outstretched boughs adorned with a plethora of leaves, which were like huge umbrellas above our heads, that wilfully blocked out the obnoxious, blaring hot glare of the sun. In truth, it was such a pleasure being in this tranquil space, that invited you to meditate on your thoughts, and to absorb everything around you, so that we barely even spoke among ourselves. We parked our SUVs and walked over to the stream, with its fast-moving water that galloped over the rocks at a speedy pace. We all threw off our shoes and rolled up our pants, and began eagerly paddling in the refreshingly cool water, which was so clear we could see the stones beneath our feet, and tiny fish charging past us. After a while we sat on the slight hilly embankment, overlooking the stream, still shaded by congregations of weeping willows. We threw stones into the water, skimming them very graciously. Every time my stone hit the water, it was with the grace of an overweight dog, which both my stepbrothers appeared to find hilariously funny. "Don't laugh at me," I chastised them. "You're my teachers, for goodness sake, and by all accounts you're pretty useless. Otherwise I'd be skimming my stones across the water rather proficiently." Cameron laughed. "What do they say? A bad workman blames his tools." I ignored his snub and quickly changed the subject. "Thank God it's cool in here. I can't believe how hot it is out there today." "Yeah, the weather's pretty brutal at the moment," admitted Hamish. "I find hot weather makes me pretty sleepy. That's why my mother says they have siestas in Italy during the late afternoon, to re-energize themselves, so that they wake up later to enjoy the cooler part of the afternoon," I told my brothers. "I didn't know that," Hamish admitted, "but it makes sense to me. What I did know is that in Japan they don't mind if you fall asleep behind your desk at your workplace. Even if you're the top CEO of a company, you're allowed to do it. It means you've worked hard. It's a good sign. If you did that here in America, you'd probably be fired on the spot." "So tell me then, what happened when you fell asleep by the stream?" I asked. "When your hair was mysteriously braided, and you turned up for lunch 3 to 4 hours late." "How do you know about that?" asked Hamish incredulously, his face going so white it looked like it had been drained of all its blood. "My mother mentioned it in one of her letters to me. That's how I know. There's more to the story than meets the eye. I knew that at once in my gut, you could say. Call it an instinct if you like. I could see Hamish and Cameron exchanging secret guarded looks together that suggested they were not likely to let me in on their story. So I pounced on them in a way they never expected, like a cougar on a deer. It was a Bigfoot, wasn't it, that braided your hair? Come on, out with it. I know it was. Both Hamish and Cameron's faces now went as white as a blank piece of paper. How can you possibly know about that, Lucy? You're from England, aren't you? You're less likely to believe in Bigfoot than people living out here are. But how could you even know this? Are you psychic or something? I chuckled. Give me a break. Of course I'm not psychic, but I can read between the lines. So are you going to tell me your story, or aren't you? I'm your stepsister, am I not? Don't I deserve to be in on the secret? Yeah, you may be our stepsister, but you're not a sister by blood, are you? Said Hamish coyly. I pulled a face. I'm sorry, but that doesn't count. I'm still your sister. Please, I begged. Please tell me. Finally Hamish, who had a heart like butter, melted at my earnest pleading. He held his brother's gaze beseechingly, and finally Cameron shrugged his shoulders and nodded his head somewhat stiffly. All right, we'll tell you, Lucy. But if you dare tell anyone else about it, we'll tell people you made the whole thing up. Do you understand? We'll deny it. We're not going to own our story. Get it? I nodded. But of course, who would I tell anyway? I hardly want to be ridiculed myself. Hamish's story in his own words. When the Dumbarton family moved to the countryside, none of us resisted the move. We were all on exactly the same page, as everybody in our family loved nature, and getting away from the bustle of city life suited us all just fine. Luckily, my father was able to do the lion's share of his work from home, behind a computer, and occasionally commute to Denver a couple of times a month. Both me and my brother were enrolled in a very good school, so everything worked out fine for us. Before long, our family had horses, ATVs, and a couple of little Yorkshire Terriers that soon decided to hang around Fee all day and had absolutely no time for the rest of us, as they literally seemed to be joined to Fee by an invisible umbilical cord. Fee had grown up with Yorkshire Terriers, so she loved them very much. My father would have preferred big dogs, but that was not going to happen. Shortly after we moved in, Fee rocked up to the house one day with 2 tiny Yorkshire Terriers, and that was that. But we all grew very attached to them, as you do. My stepmother Fee was the best thing that happened to our family. My mother had died of a brain aneurysm when I was 5 years old, so I barely have much memory of her, which is an awful pity. Since then we were raised by my father, who brought us to England for a couple of years, when he had to launch his American company to the UK market. It was in my father's spare time that he would go out riding with several riders on the weekend. They all would go together on treks on horseback, and that was where my father met Fee and fell hard for her. And of course the rest is history. Fee came back with us to America after divorcing her husband. Then she married my father. She was very regretful that she had left behind her a trail of devastation in her wake, but I understood why she did what she did. At the end of the day, we have to live our true, authentic lives, even if it might initially appear rather selfish. Sometimes to do so, we cannot help but hurt others in the process, but we have to honour our truth and try to make amends for our mistakes. That's all we can do. I think Fee's biggest mistake was marrying far too young, but I was glad she had a daughter because it meant Lucy would become our stepsister, and gaining a sister was really cool, although at that stage we had never met her. We moved into a red-bricked, very English-looking Georgian farmhouse in the countryside, overlooking fields, groves of trees, and billowing silhouettes of the mountains that smudged the sky with their voluptuous, shapely contours, sometimes dramatically shrouded by wisps of moving mist. Within no time at all, me and my brother adapted very easily to country life. We were out and about all the time, riding horses, ATVs, and of course mountain bikes. Every day my stepmother Fee was up and about at the crack of dawn, working with the horses and taking care of their intrinsic needs. Fee began to offer people horse riding lessons, as she was a natural horsewoman who had been riding horses since she was 7 years old. She was an excellent rider and a great teacher. One day during the summer holidays, me and my brother were riding our ATVs in the woodgrove on our property, and we were having a wonderful time together as you do. The woodgrove is always incredibly beautiful, boasting 4 dramatic seasonal changes from spring to summer, and of course autumn and winter. One thing that never ever changes around here, and forever remains consistent, is of course the inevitability of enjoying crisp sweet mountain air, and of course the pleasing aromatic terpenes of the woody scents from the trees in the grove. "So what are you going to do today?" my stepmother asked us. It must have been about the 5th day of our summer holidays, I suspect. "If you're looking for something to do, you can always help me muck out the stables if you like." "No thanks," I said, buttering my toast determinedly. I didn't mind helping Fee with the horses, but so early in the holidays I wanted to relax and enjoy myself. I had no intention of mucking out stables today. I was determined we were going to have an adventure. "Me and Cameron are going to the woodgrove on our ATVs," I explained. "Sorry, we can't help you. Another time, perhaps." "I'll hold you to that, Hamish," said Fee, giving me a wink as she knocked back her glass of fresh orange juice. "I think it's a beautiful day to ride your ATVs. Make sure you're back in time for lunch." "Hear that, boys?" my father interjected. "Fee wants you back in time for lunch. Now don't go letting her down." "Of course we won't let her down," we assured my father. So there me and my brother were, riding our ATVs through the grove of trees, listening to the pretty trills of the birds in the branches above our heads, and enjoying the feeling of riding up the undulating paths of the grove, which was rather hilly at the best of times, but not too challenging for our ATVs, that could really perform some cool, rather nifty stunts on their robust, nimble wheels. Before long we came to our favourite spot in the woodgrove. There are no words to describe this blissfully idyllic, tranquil wooded sanctuary, where a brisk stream of water collides through the woods, sounding like hundreds of galloping stallions, thundering past you at one hell of a speed. The water is so clear, so translucid, that you can actually see your own feet when standing in it. The stream is surrounded by trees on every side. Some, of course, are weeping willows, with long feathery leaves that graciously skim the water in a downward dog-like motion, almost as if the trees themselves are engaging in yoga. I know me and my brother did what we always do. We began paddling in the stream with our long pants rolled up above our knees, enjoying the feeling of the blasts of icy cold water moving past us, massaging our toes. After we'd frolicked around in the water for quite some time, like 2 toddlers in a playpool, we got out of the water and just sat there, enjoying the peaceful, quiet ambience of the grove, and doing absolutely nothing at all, but listening to the sounds of the forest as you do, from the birds to the obstreperous motion of the water. It was almost like becoming one with absolutely everything around you, so it was as if we were caught up in a meditation. All of a sudden we heard what I can only describe as heavy feet, thundering across the ground. That was louder than the water itself. I looked at my brother perturbed and said, "What's that?" He raised a brow. "I've no idea," he said. We both knew something was coming, and whatever it was, it had to be substantial in size. It's ironic because we weren't even the teensiest, weensiest bit afraid. You'd think we would ultimately panic and hurriedly run back onto our ATVs and get back to the farmhouse as quickly as we could. And even though we found the sound of the feet intimidating, we knew at once that this could not be a person, unless of course he weighed close to 1,000 pounds. And even though there's some hefty people in America, let's not kid, they would unlikely to be walking around in a grove if they weighed that much. I kid you not when I say the ground vibrated and heaved, and you heard the snap and crackle and pop sound that you hear when eating popped rice cereal, only this was much louder and came from the twigs being broken beneath ponderous feet. For a moment it was almost as if time stood still, for the both of us, that is, as if something was holding back the very hands of time. It was almost like we were at the theatre and were waiting in anticipation for the thick velvety curtains to be drawn back on the stage and for the play to unfold before our very eyes. We had become like spectators, and we both instinctively sensed something profound was about to happen, although we had absolutely no idea what to expect. It was rather like putting your money in the slot of a music machine and waiting to see what song it would ultimately play. That was when we saw him there standing not too far away from us. I will say this, he did not see us. I think he was focused on getting to the water for some reason. Me and my brother were so quiet that unless you had been looking directly at us, you'd have never known we were there. We were sitting there close to the edge of the stream, on a hilly obtrusion that jutted through the ground like a daybed, or a king's throne if you like, made from rocks, sheltered by the overhanging branches of weeping willows that probably made us even less conspicuous. I knew at once I was seeing a Bigfoot. There was no doubt about this in my mind. I was passionate about the program Finding Bigfoot, and my brother had teased me tirelessly about my fixation on the subject, telling me that there was no way that these powerful creatures could exist here in North America. Ostensibly, unless I was caught up in some kind of delusional, bizarre, outer-worldly dream, it would seem that my brother now had egg on his face and would have to retract his protestations, as this Bigfoot that he claimed did not exist was standing in our line of vision, clear to see. I was so astounded by what I was perceiving that my mouth dropped wide open and my eyes grew so wide I'm surprised they didn't drop out of their sockets. I could hear my brother sitting beside me. He seemed to be breathing quite fast. I'm quite sure he probably felt like he'd been thrown off his perch and was completely gobsmacked. If it was hard for me to get my head around what I was seeing, it must have been 1,000 times more challenging for my brother, as he was likely wondering if he was hallucinating. Even I was rubbing my eyes in bewilderment and thinking, no way, I can't possibly be seeing this. This has to be a dream. The Bigfoot at this point had no clue that he was being watched. I took him all in, ensuring that every part of him was burnt into my memory, because I did not want to forget him. I was in no doubt that I would probably never see him again. I think it would be a good guess to say he was about 8 foot tall, possibly taller. I never physically saw his male anatomy, as it was well covered in hair, but I knew he was male. Not because he had no breasts, of course, but his energy was so palpably masculine. Even the way he walked towards the water, swinging his arms, was done in a macho kind of king of the woods type of way, which is hard to actually explain. It was like he owned the grove, and nothing remotely intimidated him. The Bigfoot was gargantuan in size, and I think nothing prepares you for his Herculean proportions. He stood up on 2 powerful tree-trunk-sized legs that were nimble, and even though he moved towards the water noisily, his movements were fluid and graceful. I noticed he was covered with what I can only describe as a tortoiseshell-coloured hair, and in the light shards that streamed through the boughs of the trees, the red in his hair colour stood out, which was really rather beautiful. I was stunned to see the creature had braided some of the hairs on his chest into tiny, tiny little braids, which meant I could clearly see the powerful definition of his muscular torso beneath his skin. It was so impressive. I would have killed for a torso like that. I remember thinking to myself, sorry, Arnie, in terms of Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was in his prime, of course, but you've been outdone, bro. At this point in time, I had not seen the Bigfoot's face, as it was focused on the water, but I watched him leaning over the water's edge and cupping the water in the palm of his hands proficiently and drinking thirstily. All of a sudden, I guess he must have known he was being watched. He quickly looked up at us, and I remember our eyes met his. I'll never forget the moment the Bigfoot's treacle-coloured eyes met mine. I have never ever looked into eyes like this before. There was something incredible about those eyes. I felt as if I was looking into a fountain of knowledge, as if this creature knew things I had no way of ever knowing, as if he had outer-worldly powers beyond my grasp, as if I was looking into a swirling pool of intelligence. If that was not incongruously strange and rather outlandish, the next thing that happened is I heard a voice in my head that was not my own. I knew at once it belonged to the Bigfoot. He was speaking to me telepathically. He said, I didn't expect to see the both of you there. You took me by surprise. This is not good," he said, shaking his head. I remember thinking to myself, he's rather upset that we've seen him, and my thoughts were answered like a question. "Of course I'm upset you've seen me. Your kind can never see us, unless it's in your greatest good. But this was not in the plan, your seeing me." He shook his head fretfully, and that was when I noticed he had a very short neck. This time I asked the Bigfoot a question in my head, and against all the odds he continued communicating with us in some form of telepathic exchange, which was nothing short of incredulous.
"But why does it matter that we saw you? We won't tell anyone we saw you, if that helps. I get why you like to remain elusive, for the preservation of your species. Me and my brother are happy to keep stum and pretend we never saw you at all, if that's going to help."
"I'm not upset with you, young man," the Bigfoot told me. "I'm upset with myself, if you must know. I was too caught up in my own world and my thoughts to actually notice you. And that never happens. I'm normally incredibly shrewd, that I don't miss a thing. But today my head's all over the place. And it's Nampina's fault."
"Nampina's fault?" I asked. "Who's Nampina?" And that was when I noticed a sadness in the Bigfoot's eyes. He dropped his head sorrowfully to one side and said, "I've loved Nampina since I was little. She was the one for me, you know," he said, patting his heart tenderly. "My heart is aching. It's very sore, but it will be better soon. I need to start paying attention to my surroundings. Stop being so self-absorbed. Your seeing me is not at all good." "I'm sorry, but what did happen with Nampina?"
"You want to know what happened with me and Nampina? Well, me and my brother, we shared a womb together,"
which I took to mean he was a twin.
"Yesterday we let Nampina draw the stone. My father receives a stone from me and a stone from my brother. He shuffles the stones in his fists, and then he allows Nampina to choose which fist she wants. When my father opened the fist that Nampina had chosen, she selected my brother's stone. So Nampina now belongs to him, not to me. So you can see why I'm very melancholic."
"But that's not fair. It shouldn't be done like that," I said.
"But of course it's fair, young man. Nampina made her choice, didn't she? She chose my brother's energy over mine. It was meant to be. You must never interfere with the perfect divine order and synchronicity of the universe. If you do mess around with such things, they will become fragmented and fall apart. Of course I'm sorrowful, and I'm still very much alone. I thought Nampina was meant to be the one for me, but I was wrong. I know my father will find me another partner very soon, and I would like a partner, for I don't want to be on my own. I hope she'll be as lovely in her heart energy as Nampina is, for beauty of the soul is the rhythm of the heart, and it's everything to me. I really had a heart for Nampina, but it was not in my life plan. It wasn't orchestrated for me before I was born, which I thought it was, so I respect that. But now the problem is the both of you. What am I going to do about you? You were not meant to see me, and if my kind knew how foolhardy I had been, they would not be best pleased with me."
"I'm sorry, but as I told you, we can pretend we never saw you. Will that work out for you?"
"I need to make you forget that you saw me."
"Please don't do that. I don't want to forget you. I'm really glad I met you, and I think we were meant to meet you. I don't want to forget this day. It's one of the weirdest but best things that has ever happened to me in my life, meeting you. Please don't make the memory go away for us. I'm begging you."
"I tell you what I will do, since I like you both very much, and your energies please my heart. I see you both as friends, and as you say, I'm not sad to have crossed paths with you, even though it was never supposed to be on the script of your lives to meet me. I will leave behind an imprint in your memory, so that you will be in no doubt that you met me, but will also seem so surreal, that another part of yourself, the critical side of your brain, will be saying, but did that really happen? So your memory of this experience from time to time will be clouded with doubt.
Well, I can live with that. I can definitely live with that, as long as you don't wipe this memory away, because I really want to remember you, even if I doubt that I actually saw you. In that moment, I heard my brother telepathically agreeing with this plan. I just want one favour, he asked the Bigfoot.
Name it, said the Bigfoot, and I will see if I can oblige your request.
I'm really sorry about Nampina. What happened really sucks. But when your dad finds you a new partner, can you leave us a sign in the woodgrove that it's happened for you? It'll make me happy to think you've found someone new to love.
What kind of a sign would you like me to leave you? Asked the Bigfoot, scratching his head reflectively, as if caught up in deep contemplation.
I'm not sure. I thought you could think of something.
I tell you what I will do. You see this tree over here? He said, pointing to the willow tree, not far from his feet. When I have found a new love for myself, you will discover that there will be 2 rocks under the tree, 2 rocks that neither of you could pick up. I will place them here. The big one represents me. The smaller one represents my partner. And when we have younglings over the years, I will put stones under the tree, so you shall know. A blue stone will be for a boy, a pink stone for a girl. Will that suit your interests well? Will that satisfy you?
It seemed like a good deal for us, so we agreed with the Bigfoot. I do remember he told us it had been a pleasure to meet us. We did exchange further communication, of what I cannot remember, as beyond that we have no memory at all, apart from having woken up beside the stream, so many hours later, feeling woozy and light-headed, as if we'd come out of a dream-like sleep, or an anaesthetic, you could say. What the hell happened? I asked my brother, when I woke up from my sleep, rubbing my eyes, and staring around at my environment in confoundment. Had I really fallen asleep by the stream? I was so surprised, as I'd never fallen asleep in nature before, apart from when I'd been camping and had been lying in a sleeping bag under a canvas canopy. As I woke up, I remembered the Bigfoot me and my brother had seen, and wondered if I had dreamt it, but it had felt so profoundly real. I think we both fell asleep by the stream, said my brother, looking rather bewildered. I noticed that he was wiping the sleep from his eyes and letting out a stifled yawn. He glanced down briefly at his watch and his eyes widened in horror. We should have been home a long time ago. We've been by the stream for about 5 hours. How did that happen? We've long since missed lunch. We promised Fee we'd be back for lunch. My guess is Dad is going to be absolutely hopping mad with us. But Fee will be understanding. What's wrong? Asked Cameron, as I stared at him in a strange way, before we headed off back to the farmhouse. Your hair, I pointed out. You've got hundreds of tiny braids in your hair. Where did those come from? My brother began to feel his hair and looked at me agog when his fingers felt the texture of the braids. You too! Your hair is covered in braids. Oh, Lord, said my brother. I had a dream about a Bigfoot, but it must be true. In the dream he told us he'd leave us a sign that we met him. And this is the sign, don't you see? Our hair has been braided, and they're the very same braids we saw on the Bigfoot's torso. We definitely saw him. So it was real, I said excitedly. I had the same dream. I think we met a Bigfoot. I can hardly believe it. We did indeed, bro, and I for one do not doubt it was not a dream. We need to get back to the house before Dad throws a wobbly at us. He's going to think we've got no manners at all, not returning home for lunch. You know what he's like. Thank God Fee will probably calm him down. Me and my brother, sensing we needed to return to the farmhouse pronto, hurriedly began to look for our ATVs. But we couldn't find them anywhere, and were freaking out. So we decided we'd better make tracks to the farmhouse without our ATVs, which would mean we'd arrive back home later than ever, to be met by a less than amused reception. We wisely did not want to add fuel to the fire. If we told him our ATVs had gone missing, we knew he would not react well to it, so we decided we would return home and search for our ATVs the following morning,
in the hope that we might find them. We knew where we'd parked them, and the fact that they had disappeared was rather baffling for us. When we got home, I brazenly, rather foolishly, told my father that we'd fallen asleep by the stream and woken up with braided hair. Thank God I didn't expand upon our story. My father was not buying any of it. To say he was furious with us for missing lunch that Fee had prepared for us was an understatement. My father had very fixed views about how youngsters should be raised. He believed me and my brother came from a very spoilt, self-centered, lazy, mollycoddle generation that fails to be appreciative and lacks manners. So he has tried his level best to install them in us. Let me tell you, when we rocked up looking dishevelled and dirty, with grass in our hair, my father was not very happy. With hands on hips, he glared at us defiantly, glancing down at his watch. "How very nice of you, Cameron and Hamish, to grace us with your appearance, your highnesses. I hope you enjoyed your time in the woodgrove, while your lady's maid, Fee here, was preparing your lunch for you. I hope you're proud of yourselves for being incredibly rude." "I'm so sorry, Dad. We both are," I said gingerly, looking at my father with pleading eyes like a scolded dog.
"You're sorry, Hamish? Is that all you can say?"
said my father, growing as red as a field of poppies.
"Fee was preparing lunch for you. You were supposed to be back at 3 hours ago. 5 hours, actually. But did you rock up for lunch? No, you didn't. What do I keep telling you about your generation? All you youngsters ever think about is me, myself, and I. It's the story of your lives, is it not? Do you stop to think about how hard Fee has been slaving away over the stove to make you a nice lunch? And you didn't have the decency to even bother to show up. You kids make me sick."
"I'm so sorry, Dad. Me and Cameron, we didn't mean to be rude, but it's not what you think. We were sitting by the stream. We fell fast asleep for many hours. And when we woke up, our hair had been mysteriously braided. You can see our hair is both braided. Lots and lots of tiny braids." Cameron was making a warning face at me over my last foolish comments. He sagaciously preempted my father's less than amused reaction to my outlandish claims.
"Is that the best you can do, son?"
My father looked as if he was about to clobber me over the ear. He was so mad at me.
"If you want to tell me lies, you're going to have to do a lot better than that, Hamish, for me to actually believe you."
Fee was trying to calm my father down.
"Don't be hard on them, love. Kids will be kids. Give them a break. You were young once. I'm sure you got up to all kinds of mischief when you were their age. I was young once, I agree. But I'll tell you something for nothing," my father said, waving his finger. "Never once did I disobey my father. If I was expected back home for lunch, I would always be home on time, and I never came up with ridiculous excuses." "We only have your word for that," said Fee, giving us both a wink. "For we all know you might have broken the rules more times than you care to remember. But you'll never admit that to us, would you, dear?" "It's not funny, Fee. I'm trying to teach both of my children to respect the boundaries we lay down for them. And for the record, I was a lot better behaved than Cameron and Hamish were, growing up. That's for sure."
"Even so, love, it's the school holidays, isn't it? Kids are allowed to let their hair down once in a while. Besides, the lunch I was cooking was all terribly informal. Nothing special. I certainly wasn't slaving away over the stove as you suggest." Thankfully, Fee diffused the situation. She's good for Dad in that way. She manages to calm him down. But we never told him our ATVs were missing. And the next day, at the earliest opportunity, we found them, exactly where we'd parked them the day before. It was so extraordinary, to say the least. For when we had looked for our ATVs, they were gone. But now here they were. And on each ATV, we discovered a slender, dark braid. And we knew the braids came from the Bigfoot. He must have cut them off his torso to give to us, telling us in no uncertain terms that our encounter with him had been genuinely real. We still have our little braids of hair in our bedside drawers that rather remind us of this extraordinary day. So that's my story. Are you happy, Lucy, now? "Wow, I can't believe that. It's an incredible story," I said. I was completely astounded, because I knew that my brothers had indeed encountered a Bigfoot that day, and I was eager to see the braids the Bigfoot had left them on their ATVs. It's a sad story, I said, don't you think, about Nampina? I mean, goodness gracious, you only saw the Bigfoot because he was so heartbroken that day. He wasn't focusing on his surroundings properly. Did you check to see if he left any stones under the willow tree on the other side of the stream? I mean, didn't he say he would do that for you if he found a partner? And of course when he had children? We're always looking under the tree. We looked a couple of days ago, Hamish admitted. We do keep checking, you know. But to date we haven't found any stones under the tree. So I don't think he's found a partner yet. Which really sucks. Well, let's go and have another look. You never know. There might be a couple of stones there by now. Both Hamish and Cameron looked doubtful. But they humoured me and rolled up their pants to cross the ice-cold water of the stream. We walked over to the willow tree, and it was Hamish who let out an audible gasp. For on the far side of the tree were two massive boulders, one bigger than the other, that had not been there a couple of days earlier.
Oh my goodness gracious! There are two stones here. One is absolutely enormous. We couldn't even pick that up if we tried. He's left a message for you. He's telling you he's got a partner.
We began waving our fists in the air excitedly.
Yes, 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 yes,
we said excitedly. We knew the Bigfoot had found himself a partner, and our hearts were gladdened. I was sad when I returned to England, to leave the Dumbarton family behind me. They had been incredible hosts, and had warmly welcomed me into their homes and their lives, and my visit to America had been incredible. I was naturally disappointed not to have encountered the Bigfoot myself, but I still remain in contact with my brothers, and am close to my mother and her husband Connor. A couple of years ago my father got remarried to a lovely woman called Nancy. They are very happy together. My stepbrothers were glad to announce that one year they found a blue stone under the willow tree, left for them by the Bigfoot, and 2 years after that they found a pink stone. So they do know that the Bigfoot has obviously sired a girl and a boy, and I'm thrilled for the creature. I'm still incredibly close to my best friend Paul. I'm glad that the old wounds of the past have finally been healed, and I've learnt the importance of forgiveness, because if you have hate in your heart, the only person you're actually hurting is yourself. The best thing I ever did in my life was to forgive my mother. I'm glad I did. Imagine your anger is like a piece of coal in your hand. If you keep holding it, you'll only be burning yourself. You need to let it go, for the wounds to actually heal. I'm due to go to America in the fall next year, to stay with my mother and her family. So if anything else happens, or if I do encounter a Bigfoot, you'll be sure to be hearing from me. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, that is a most wonderful story. Oh, it was just so lovely. What an incredible, incredible story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.